Hey, so now we are just testing this, seeing if the stream actually works before we do anything else. All right, so hey, so we are just going to be sculpting some creatures, and I'll be taking your questions as well. It's only me this time. Morten will not be here, so I'll be taking all your questions, and I'm just gonna be sculpting some kind of fun little creature, which I think is gonna be a lot of fun. So we'll just wait for a second. Can anyone confirm that the sound is actually decent? I've had some issues with my microphone recently, so I just wanna confirm before we really get too deep into this. I assume that means that this is working. So the way we'll be doing this now is you are more free to ask questions. Hey Paul, nice seeing you here. More free to ask questions, and then I'll just be sculpting along. So cool. So we're doing a Black Friday sale this week until I believe the 5th of December, and to celebrate that, I guess we are now doing some streaming, which should be a lot of fun. So cool. So, feel free to ask questions throughout, and I'll just be doing some sculpting. I'm going to be doing some kind of dinosaur, crocodilian style creature, which I think is going to be a really cool guy. So whenever I'm doing this, I am just starting off, in this case, just with a sphere. And I'm always just looking up in the right corner here. I actually really like this guy, because a big issue is if you're just sculpting, it's kind of hard to know the orientation. You have no idea if you're looking at something upside down or whatever. So we know we're looking straight ahead. So what I'm then doing is I am just kind of cutting in the mouth and just keeping it loose and playful, and kind of putting in some eyes and just putting in some general elements. It looks a bit like a Pac-Man Muppet at this point, but that's just how it works. You get started with something and you keep it loose and simple. You have to get started somewhere, and it's gonna look not great for some time. Let me just post this stream on a few different areas as well, so that people can follow along with that. And also we have, just while I'm doing that, we have 50% off on all the FlippedNormals exclusives as well. So if there is something here that you've been wanting to check out, now is definitely the time to do that. So cool, we are now back to doing some sculpting. I just want to let people know about this. Yeah, the stream has just begun. I have just made this nice little Pac-Man figure. So what I'm doing now is I'm looking at some general reference. You hear this, you hear us talking about this all the time when it comes to sculpting, but you just gotta start with some reference. So what I'm doing when it comes to this is I'm looking at some general reference from ArtStation actually. One of the advantages of ArtStation is that you have people who's already interpreted real life, and particularly with something like a dinosaur, it's pretty tricky to get real world reference because it's all just interpreted from bones, and probably everything we know about it is wrong anyway. So finding some cool artistic reference on ArtStation is a really, really good idea. It can just help you a ton. I also have some references of skulls as well, which really helps me just to solidify it. Because even though, you know, dinosaurs, for all intents and purposes, the way we were doing them, we were just doing them as dragons. We're not really too concerned about any of the real world aspects of it. Then we would probably make them all with feathers. So, you know, we'll basically treat this as entirely as a fantasy creature and just go with that. So I will just find the stream and just seeing if there are any questions here. So I won't really be taking too technical questions. Like I see there are some questions like on like importing things into different toolkits and that kind of stuff, or baking and such. I'll be dealing more with more like maybe career questions or sculpting questions or you know, things like that. Something that I don't have to open up a file and looking at that, because I will be spending the majority of time just sculpting here. There are many ways to sculpt, and the way you see me sculpt in tutorials might be different from the way I'm doing it now, because now I'm working more the way I'm actually working. Well, in tutorials, you often have to simplify things down, where first you have to get the skull down, then you have to get the muscles down, you know, all those kind of things. But that's not actually how you sculpt most of the time. You know, once you're doing it for a while, you start to like shorthand a lot of things, where, you know, we're more like indicating where something is, and then because that's just much faster. And yes, you have to know the skull and everything, how it all works, but honestly, that is something that you just kind of intuitively understand after a while. It's like if you're drawing, you know, in the beginning, you really have to do the construction. You have to just draw the boxes around the human. But you don't really see professional artists doing that. You're seeing them, you know, do a little crosshair and such on the faces, but in reality, you're not really seeing anyone do a full construction, because you just kind of intuitively learn how that works. Barry is saying, I hate the UI of Zbrush. Every time I open the program, I have to relearn all the hotkeys. And I feel you. I mean, luckily, you don't actually need to use hotkeys in Zbrush. You can make a custom interface, and you can just use the items here. The hotkeys for me isn't really the biggest issue. It's the workflow, where the workflow is pretty simple once you know how, but it's a tricky, the UX, the user experience is not ideal when it comes to Zbrush. It's honestly hard, particularly if you aren't using it all the time. It's easy to forget how tricky Zbrush can actually be to use. Was it stupid of me to quit 3D because of Zbrush? I mean, you know, if you really enjoy sculpting, or if you really enjoy 3D, and then Zbrush was what defeated you, I would say that it's worth giving another chance. We have videos on YouTube where we're talking about, you know, everything you need to know about Zbrush, and I think the video is like an hour long, and it basically teaches you all the things. You know, if that's what's setting you apart from doing 3D or not doing 3D, I highly recommend giving it another chance. You know, if you really enjoy sculpting as well, but you just can't do Zbrush, then you can always try Blender. You can always try sculpting in Blender. It's definitely not as good. Like it's quite underdeveloped compared to Zbrush, but it still gets the job done. Is 25-year-old too old to start a career in 3D? Absolutely not. I met some students last week here in Copenhagen, and one of them was in his 40s, and he was in first year of studies. Absolutely not too late. I heard somebody say this in a nice way. Like, let's say it takes like 3 years to study to become a professional 3D artist. You can do it less, but if you're 25, and that means in 3 years you're 28, you'll be 28 anyway. You might as well be 28 while you know now you're a 3D artist. I mean, 25 isn't even old for it. I mean, that's really young. So no, you're never too old to start with 3D. I know several people who was well in their 30s who starting to do 3D. I know some people who were in their 30s when they started, who are now very successful when it comes to doing 3D. So like, don't let age be age fully here. Scylla Gorilla is saying, bottom of my heart, I know I can sculpt, but I never started since everyone I've asked advice from always told me to learn anatomy, and that's what keeping me from learning sculpting. Anatomy is one of those tricky ones. I think anatomy is in many ways taught in the wrong way. I think anatomy is often taught as you need to memorize every single muscle in the body, and if you can't do that, you're not going to be a good sculptor. That's simply not true. You need to know some of it, of course you do, but it doesn't work like that. It doesn't work that in the way that you learn all the muscles and now you know how to sculpt. Sculpting is much more about getting good form work, getting good shapes, getting appealing figures. Yes, you need anatomy to a certain degree, of course you do, but it shouldn't be just a boring thing you just have to study all the time. It should be, you should try to do a character, get feedback on the anatomy, improve that for next time. It doesn't have to be this insane, boring thing that you just force yourself to do, because that's just gonna kill anyone's motivation. It would be like, hey, I want to learn how to write a story. All right, cool, memorize every single word in English language. No, you don't do that. You learn new words along the way. Blender plus plugin or Zbrush, which do you think is better for sculpting? I mean, like, there's just no debates. Zbrush is just a much better tool. Blender has had a little bit of development, or quite a bit of development recently, but it's just not even comparable to where Zbrush is. It's not just like specific features missing. It's the entire. It's weird to compare. Say the Zbrush has good UX here, but it's a refined experience. As weird as that might sound, the sculpting is just phenomenal within Zbrush. Like, I don't think Blender is ever going to catch up on what Zbrush currently has. I can't log in to the site, guys. Any news on that part? Have you emailed our support? I'm the one doing support, so you can just email us at support@FlippedNormals.com, and I'll check that out after the stream. Try to reset your password. Emil is asking, do you think messaging hiring managers and asking them for available junior runner roles is a good idea? I mean, yeah, as long as you're doing it in a professional and kind manner. If you were to contact recruiters on LinkedIn, follow them there, and then respond to like their posts or just generally inquire what's up, that's not a bad idea at all. That's often how you learn what opportunities are out there. Just be sure to be professional about it, and don't assume. Don't be cocky about it. Be humble about it. Do you know Candice? I don't think I know Candice or Candice. There might be issues on the website. Maybe there's been a lot of traffic. We often have this issue when it comes to Black Friday, just because it gets seriously overloaded. We upgrade the servers every single year, but honestly, it's tricky to keep that up. It often happens. Give it a little bit of time. Matt Curtis is asking, best Zbrush product on sale in your opinion that is not the skin kit? Well, let us see. One of the things I really enjoyed making was the introduction to sculpting. This is thanks for the question. This is a product I made where you go through basically learning how to sculpt. It's not Zbrush specific. We do use Zbrush, but it's more learning how to sculpt. It's taking a character through from a sphere like this and then into making a final sculpt, and then understanding anatomy, understanding squashing and stretching, gesture, all these kind of things, sculpting over some student work to see common mistakes, sculpting over more student work here, understanding how to do pores, so this kind of stuff. I think this is one of the best Zbrush products we have. We also have one here as well, which is super nice, which is a bundle, which contains some of the most popular products we have for Zbrush. So that's it. Back to Dinosaur. How long you've been in industry? Well, I'm not in industry anymore. I haven't worked in industry since 2018. Before that, I really was in for 5 years, working at 3 different VFX studios in London. But I've been doing 3D for much longer than that. I started with 3D in 2006, so that's now 15 years ago. So quite some time. Robert is asking, as a beginner, any thoughts on using something like Rism for UVing, or just stick with Blender? I mean, I think that honestly, the UV tools in Blender are some of the worst ever made in all of mankind. They feel like they are from like 2008. And Rism is also fantastic. If you are doing any kind of modeling, or if you do UVing a lot and you need specific control over UVs, I highly, highly, highly recommend that you get something like Rism. I could not imagine doing modeling and using the UV tools in Blender. I know there are some people who suck it up and they use them, but just spare yourself that pain. Coming from Maya, where the UV tools are actually really good, because they bought a plugin. They were not very good before that. It's really hard to UV map in Blender. Even though I understand the tools, they just have a long way left. So please, for your own sanity, use something like Rism. Maybe they have a Black Friday offer as well. I haven't used Rism a whole lot, but it's from what I have, it's fantastic. You also have like crazy old tools like UV Layout as well, which is basically the best UV tool ever made, but it has the UX, the interface and user experience of something from like 1991. This is an interesting question from Aman. Is it really difficult for a non-Euro to find a job in this field in England? Yeah, just for Euros as well, it might be hard now in England, because with Brexit and everything, that a lot of things changed there. I know if you are in from a non, from before, in the before times at least, if you were from outside the EU, you need to go through a visa process. But I work with plenty of people from outside the EU as well. Canadians, Americans, people from India. It's definitely possible. I honestly don't know the exact visa regulations for those countries, but 100% doable. Here's a great question from 472. What should I do if I stop seeing improvements on my sculpts? You often see stagnation if you stop iterating on your sculpt, meaning like you stop getting feedback on it. Like if you keep doing the same thing over and over again, you're going to get the same result over and over again. What I highly recommend when you start to stagnate, or in general, is to try to do figure sculpting. Try to do figure sculpting from first from imagination. This is an exercise we do when it comes to the mentorship we're doing. Try to first do a sculpt from imagination. See how far you get. This is hard. This is legitimately a really, really, really hard exercise. And it's great because it shows where your skill sets actually are without reference. Yes, you need to reference when you're doing proper sculpting, but you also need to just see objectively where your skill sets are. So once you've been doing that, then I recommend that you start sculpting with reference and you start to improve on the areas. Use something like scans from something like 3D Scan Store, 1024, and or like the Smithsonian have a ton of cool scans from like not of humans but of of old statues. Same if you go to, I think it's mymanufactory.com and Sketchfab. They have tons of scans of like old statues. Do studies of them. Do proper studies. If you feel like you're starting to stagnate, do proper studies. But don't fall into the trap of like lining stuff up perfectly and get all the image views to line up on image planes, because that way you're not just gonna line things up. You're not gonna learn a whole lot from it. So properly commit to doing studies. Is there a place, website you can go to get mentorships? So I've started taking on mentors or mentees now. I currently have 2 students, and I'll keep doing only 2 students, at least for quite some time. if you look into, I don't have the link in front of me right now because I'm sculpting, but if you look at, if you go to FlippedNormals on YouTube, I guess that should be easy because you should already be there, I suppose, and you look into the post history there, like last week, we posted a link to the mentorship where you can get more information. As a character artist, do you think it's feasible to aim only for production animation jobs rather than VFX CG? Like I interpret here like the production animation jobs, that something like a DNEG feature, which do that, or something like Pixar or Disney. I mean, absolutely. I mean, people have to do those jobs as well. It's absolutely possible to get jobs not just within VFX, but in those fields as well. You just have to be good at what you're doing there. You just have to build a portfolio, which means that you are hireable. And how do you know if you're hireable or not? Well, you talk to people who are currently working there. You can find them on LinkedIn or ArtStation, send them a polite message, and then ask. Martin Sørensen asked me, which one of you is from Norway? I am from Norway. Henning is from Norway. Morten is from Denmark. Though right now, we're both in Copenhagen. Do we need a high-end tablet, or can we do it a mediocre tablet too? Honestly, any tablet works. I've sculpted on basically the whole range of tablets available in the whole world I've ever produced. Anything works. If you're a beginner, get a cheap tablet. Just, of course, if you have the extra cash, it's nice to buy something nicer, but honestly, the tablet is not going to be the determining factor. Dranak is just saying thanks. So thank you so much. I really appreciate the kind words. Adrian is asking, if I want to do a scientifically accurate creature model, what is a typical workflow? I've been starting off with a skeletal scan and then adding muscles to it. Honestly, if you want to do like something proper scientific, don't just get a scan of the skeleton, get a scan of the whole animal. Like if I was doing like something like this is a bit too like fantasy wise, but if I was doing like a crocodile or something, get a scan of a crocodile, if possible. No, that can be a little tricky due to the fact that we're trying to scan a crocodile, but the more real world reference you can possibly get, the easier it is. If I were to do a realistic like scientific animal, I would have started off with get a scan of the animal if possible, or get a scan of the skeleton. Scans are important, not just reference images, because that shows the truth of things. Reference images can hide a lot of things. Scans just show much better things. Then get scans for textures. Try to break down the textures as much as possible into like what is the albedo, what is the roughness, what is the bump map and all that. And then I would make really nice pre-made textures like alphas in something like Zbrush, and then would have plastered that on top of it. Who are you top 3D artists, top 10 3D artists, not including yourself? Well, I would not be anywhere near the top of my own 3D artists. Some of the top 3D artists, let me actually show some amazing 3D artists here. Here's one of my favorites. This is Damien. We used to work together at MPC. Absolutely fantastic artist. I really enjoy what he's doing as well. So, he just has like crazy stuff, and he's just beyond productive. I don't know how this guy can just output all of this. Just really cool stuff. Obviously, Raffaele Grassetti is one of the best sculptors out there as well. You have a guy called Glauco, who's fantastic. Let's see if I can find him. There we go. There's Raffaele Grassetti. I probably misspelled his name. But yeah, Rafa Grossetti, obviously a fantastic artist as well. And then we actually have the guy who I'm using for reference here as well, which is Antoine. Antoine and I, we used to also work together at MPC some years ago, back when I was in the industry, and he's just awesome. So I'm actually using some of his work now for reference, just because, well, he's one of the best creature models I know. He's a senior artist at ILM right now, and absolutely fantastic. So moving that back to the sculpting. Here you can see some of the likenesses of that. What kind of skills do I need to start working in a company? That is a great question. It depends, of course, on the position you're going for. I mean, that depends entirely on the position. But you have you basically need to have a marketable skill set. For instance, if you want to be a character artist, you know, I look through the world through the lens of being a character artist, at least when it comes to this, because that's what I used to do. If you want to do that and you were to only sculpt dinosaurs like this, let's say you had 10 dinosaurs like this, that would not be particularly helpful unless you were to be on a dinosaur show. You want to show range. You want to show to the company that you have real range in what you can do. Because if you can only do one thing, I mean, cool, but you need, most of the time, they need you to do multiple things. So show real range within what you want to do. And then please do talk to professionals before you start making your portfolio. Talk to professionals in your field. You don't know what skills you need without having talked to professionals. You just can't assume that. When I was reviewing stuff for recruitment at DNEG, I would just look at a lot of weird portfolios. You can just tell that they kind of assume what we wanted to see instead of just knowing. When I joined the industry, I asked a few senior modeler and lead artists in the industry, what should I make? And they were like, here's a list, make these things. And I was like, cool. Then I made those things. And there were definitely artists who are better than me, but it doesn't really matter that much if they're better than you if you have a more marketable portfolio. Do you enjoy working? Yes. I work way too much. I really enjoy doing 3D art, and now obviously with FlippedNormals as well. It's a really fun. It's really fun doing all the crazy stuff we're doing with that. With a few simple words, what is your workflow from beginning to end of a character creature creation? You can't really do that necessarily in a few simple words. So it's like one of those, I don't have time enough to write you a short letter. So I'll explain that in a few more words. First, gather reference. Figure out if it's a creature, figure out what kind of creature is it. Where does it live? Find specific reference of all that. How old is a creature? Is it a herbivore, a carnivore? All of those specific things you have to know. And then you start blocking it out. You know, if you're doing it for production, you get a base mesh. In this case, for production, I would have started with a dinosaur base mesh. If not, you know, start with sphere. And then from there, make sure the shapes are working really well. Don't retopologize it until you're happy with the design. The design happens in the sculpting phase, not during retopology or anything like that. So make sure you have that sorted out before anything else. And once that's sorted, you know, you don't have to have the whole thing sorted. Like, you don't have to have every single detail in there, but it should be a cohesive design. Then you can retopologize it. You know, keep that simple. Look for reference for retopology. And then from there, you will take it back into Zbrush, reprojecting all details, and then you go crazy with like refinement. Really get in all the specific shapes there. And then you can take it into something like Mari or Painter, and you can add like all the scales and all that. It work really well to do that in something like Painter because it's a lot more flexible than doing the ZBrush. Or you can use something like, well, you know, shilling here, but like the FlippedNormals skin kit, which you can use to really like get into the nitty-gritty details directly in ZBrush, which can work really well. And then you export all your maps, a displacement map from Zbrush, the mesh from Zbrush as well. Take this into, I prefer Arnold for rendering. Arnold is not the fastest, It's not the most intuitive, but it's very, very good and has a very good skin shader. So take this into Arnold, and then you render it, put up some nice lights, and that's it for personal work. This becomes more complicated if you're in production, because there you need to rig your character. And there you have the extra steps there that you probably need to test if the design works with the quick rig throughout the design process. Any of those artists you mentioned earlier good at animation? I don't believe they're good at animation. There are very few people who are good at animation and good at most other things. Most people who are good at animation I find to be specialists at animation, just because animation is such an insanely specialized field compared to something like modeling like this. Yes, I can texture this and I can light this and maybe even rig it, but animation, that's like acting. You have to learn to become an actor. So animation is just a whole different skill set. And I will just leave you guys for a little bit. I just have to take a quick round to the bathroom. Apologies for that. You guys can check out Raffles Grassetti's work while I'm gone. Just check out this insane piece right here. Really enjoyed this. And we are back to sculpting. Is there any difference between working as a freelancer or full-time employee in a matter of required skills? Which is easier to dig in? That is a good question. I have to think about that for a second. If you're a freelancer, then you have to get your clients. So it can be hard to get clients. While if you are full-time employed, now you need to get the job once and then you keep getting work from that. So it might be hard to get actual clients if you're a freelancer, but it can also be more well paid. It's a tricky one. Freelancer is just a different position. You also have to deal with your own taxes and deal with all that. Skill set wise, you probably need much of the same skills, to be honest. Did you go to school according to field in Norway? No, I left when I was 20 and moved to Denmark to study at a school here. So I don't really have any education in school in Norway. I find the 3D schools in Norway, at least they used to not be very good. I still don't think they're fantastic. But no, I didn't study in Norway. Would you recommend asking the actual recruiter at the studio you want to apply for portfolio tips? I would, instead of asking the recruiter, I would ask the artist working there. Simply because while the recruiters, of course, they know kind of what they like, the supervisors or artists working there, they would know more specifics. Ultimately, somebody's not going to get hired just because a recruiter looks at it. They would be looking at this with a more technical person as well. We have a video actually with a recruiter from DNEG, which you can find on our channel. That would be from July 2018. What to make when you are starting? I assume that means what kind of things should you be creating when you're a beginner. Honestly, like make anything. Just go crazy, have fun, and just enjoy the process. When you're a beginner, the whole world is yours. You can try out all the different things, experiment and have fun. Just don't be scared. Try to do just whatever you enjoy doing. And then once you've been doing this for a while, then you can start to specialize more. But in the beginning, don't don't get too specialized. Don't get too caught up in one specific thing. Start and, start to have fun and see if you enjoy this field. Calvin is saying, I just found out your channel a few days ago, and I must say I'm hooked. Keep up the amazing work. Thank you very much. We will. We're going to have a lot of really cool content soon as well, I'm sure. We're probably going to be streaming a fair bit this week as well. At least I will be streaming a bit. Here, when I'm sculpting now, I'm trying to think where I can place some teeth here. So you have like kind of like two ways of placing teeth. You have like placing teeth underneath lips, or you have a kind of just chucking them in here. And that's what I'm going to do for this. If you just place a teeth a little bit like this, I find that the character looks a bit more evil and sinister and a bit more crude. Well, if you hide them under the lips, the character looks a bit more friendly. What is your opinion of the evolution of on the evolution of the industry regarding AI? Are you not afraid to see software doing sculptures work and therefore changing the way artists doing the art in the field? That's a very interesting one. So far, we aren't really seeing that. We're seeing some experiments. We're seeing some like GAN breeders, those kind of things that they can produce images really fast, and you also have things like Topaz Gigapixel, which allows you to uprise stuff really fast. But we're still not seeing that yet. It's really hard to say what that's going to look like. I think we're going to see a lot more automation happening. Like, for instance, you have AI-based denoisers, which is incredibly interesting. For pure sculpting, I think you will always need to have a good artistic eye for that. Same with, like, no matter how good AI becomes at images, you still need to have a good sense of taste. Honestly, the way I see AI coming is that technical skills will become more obsolete and artistic skills will become more important. Where instead of necessarily a concept artist having to draw 200 different concepts and dealing with perspective and all technical things, they can ask an AI to generate images, and then they can use their sense of artistic understanding to then develop those images further. I think you're going to see the same thing with 3D as well. We aren't really seeing auto-read topology using AI. You see using like zero measure. That is in no way AI. That's just like looking at clever curvatures and such. But I think we are going to be seeing skills like UVing and read topology and all that kind of stuff go more away, next 10 years. And meaning that you can focus more on the creative work, basically accelerating the trend we're already seeing. As a colorblind person, could you suggest any way around to work in industry and modeling and texturing? Yeah, that's actually an interesting one, because there's a surprising amount of people who are colorblind in this industry. My girlfriend was talking about one just a few days ago. First off, obviously there are jobs that is going to be harder. Like being a color grader is probably more out of the question. But modeling for that honestly shouldn't matter. I can make this guy red. Nothing changes on the model whatsoever. When it comes to texturing, that is an interesting one. So a lot of people seem to equate texturing with coloring things. Texturing for me is about surfacing. You're defining what the surface looks like. Is it bumpy or shiny or, while of course color is important, texturing for me is more surfacing, which means that you can very well be a really good texture artist without being fantastic at color. Now, if you are colorblind, it's probably helpful to have like a chart of like illegal values to use. I know some people who they can take it into Photoshop and then just color pick, and they know, well, I can't necessarily perceive these colors, but Photoshop tells me no. So just be aware of, what ranges you can't use. But I mean, I've absolutely seen people who are colorblind who's still had fantastic careers. There was just a concept artist I saw on Twitter recently who discovered that he was colorblind, I believe. So, you can do pretty crazy stuff. And honestly, when it comes to this kind of work, so much of it is just values, just black and white values. Yes, color is important, but once you master your values, color can be kept quite simple. Where's Morton? Yes, I guess some happy news there. Morton and his girlfriend had a baby not too long ago. So I guess Morton is changing some diapers and trying to make the little girl calm down and fall asleep. If you were hiring, if you were the hiring manager, what would you look for in a junior character creature artist? I would look for variation. Unity, but with variation. I would look for skill sets that would show that I could throw most things at them, where they're not specialists at making dinosaurs or anything like that. I would assume that first, pure creature models are hard to combat, particularly as juniors. Let's assume it's creature and character. I would want to see some solid figure sculpting work, just showing that this person actually understands how to sculpt nice figures. Then I would like to see a few different types of characters made. It really helps to have some marvelous designer in there, just because you can make clothing, which makes you more valuable, not essential. I would definitely want to see good understanding of topology. Sculpting, while sculpting is of course very important, you just need topology as well. Good understanding of UVs would help as well. Maybe some hard surface in there. It doesn't have to be a full on train or something, but maybe something like a knight is good, because that shows that it's a character, but there's also a hard surface model. So you want to show range. You want to show that you can do what the company wants to do, and it might also be specific to what the projects they're working on right now. Let's say you want to apply for a studio, and that studio is only making dinosaur movies for the next 6 years, ILM. Then maybe it makes sense to have something which focuses more on dinosaurs. I know somebody who could hire it at one of those studios by making basically only fan art for one of the movies they were working on. And they were like, it's fan art, but it's also exactly what we need. So, yeah. Have you seen the new Zbrush update? I see you haven't downloaded it yet. Yeah, I checked through the list of the changelog, and it wasn't really anything that interesting for me. They're going more into the hard surface territory, and I don't really do hard surface, particularly on the Zbrush. So, yeah, for me, the latest version isn't that interesting. Though I'm willing to say that I might be wrong on that. There might be some crazy cool stuff, but yeah, unless there is some crazy new features, I don't really opt it right away. I'm always suspicious as well about when it comes to bugs for new versions, because I just know how buggy that kind of stuff can be. What do you recommend for Retopo? ZRemesher or Maya? Both! ZRemesher is fantastic for automatic retopology, and Maya is pretty good for manual retopology. The question isn't so much which tool is better, it's more like, you have two completely different ways of doing it. For manual retopology, Maya is great, but you don't necessarily want to manual retop or everything. But if you need to retop or something specific, then you can't use ZRemesher, because you just need the specific control. If I were to work on this guy more seriously, I would have taken him into Maya and retopologized him from scratch there. Why is fan art looked down on in portfolios? That's a really good one. I don't think fan art is looked down on. I think bad fan art is looked down on. If you're making some awesome, like a dragon from Game of Thrones, or some crazy, if you were to do some kind of crazy fortress from Lord of the Rings or something like that, I don't think that would be looked down on at all. I think that would be really cool. It shows that you know how to do something which will actually be used in a movie. But I think fan art's got a bad rep from the DeviantArt days, where you had people who were they weren't really observing the movies. They would just kind of copy what they would be seeing. But I definitely think fan art absolutely is a good way of doing it in a portfolio. I'd like to put it like this: I don't think doing original art in your portfolio is necessarily a crazy good idea, at least if you're a character artist, because then you are concepting from scratch. And sure, if you're a concept artist, you obviously need that. But if you're a character modeler, your job is not necessarily concept from scratch. It can be elements of that, but you very much need to work with other people's ideas. And by doing fan art, you're showing you know how to do that. But just make sure to do it well. It's all about doing something well. can you give some advice on becoming a texture artist? Yes, I can. Texturing is really interesting. It was a little bit what I was talking about before when it comes to like being colorblind. I find that a lot of people, they tend to just focus on the color. Well, you should consider it a surface. You should really consider you should consider yourself a surface artist, which means that you need to have a holistic view on the shader and on the maps you're doing. It's one system. Yes, you need to adjust some stuff in a shader, but really I prefer if the maps I output from texturing are as close as possible, and they don't require any grading at all in my shader. So make sure to consider it one system. You are describing what happens when light hits the surface, and you can describe it either in the shader or in maps. But maps are basically just giving more information to the shader. Another tip as well is I really prefer to think more holistically when it comes to where does modeling begin and where does modeling end and where does texturing begin. If you have, like, let's say this was like final and you had all these scales on the model, I would consider that modeling even if I did it in something like Mari or Painter, just because you were now describing the shape of it. I'd consider surfacing to be what happens when light hits the surface here. Is it going to be shiny, or is it going to be red or dull, or is it metal? But I consider it modeling if you're describing what is the surface. So I've seen some models that have been really under-modeled, and now you're trying to texture them, and they don't have mid-frequency, they don't really have anything nice going for them, and now you're trying to texture them, and it becomes really, really hard. But if you have a model that's really well done, it has like all the pores and all the scales and everything here, and you're trying to texture that, honestly, that is not that hard. You can extract ambient occlusion maps, cavity maps, and all that for it. And you can work with a fairly soft brush. You can tile things across it, and you can mask it off with the ambient occlusion and cavities, the curvatures and all that. And it becomes a lot easier. So my tip for you, if you want to become a texture artist, particularly for characters like this, is just consider the modeling not to be over until all the shapes are in it. You don't have to do it in Zbrush. You can do that in Mari or Painter. But just consider modeling the shape. Modeling is describing the shape. Surfacing, texturing, is describing what happens when light hits the model. What about Topology? Topology is great. Topology is just a fantastic tool for topology. It's like if I was modeling in Maya all the time, I would probably just stick to Maya for topology. But if I was modeling in Blender all the time, or Max or something like that, where the retopology tools are not crazy good, then I would have might have considered Topology. You also have Retopoflow for Blender as well, which is really good, even though I still think Topology is a bit further ahead. What is the best software for modeling armor and character accessories? Honestly, the software you are most comfortable with. Modeling armor, hard surface things it's like the most tested part of 3D. Any software can do that. You can do it in Cinema 4D, Houdini, Blender, Maya. It really, really doesn't matter. It's like polygonal modeling. Most software have comparable tools. So it doesn't really matter what you use there. If you were to give a Maya artist Blender, within a few days they can model the same thing in the same software. Do you have a course in your store that goes in depth on baking around modeling? Yes, we do actually. Let's go here to FlippedNormals. We have a course by a guy called Chung Trafficander. We can also be able to go here as well. Let's go by default, it sorts by most popular. So you can see FlippedNormals Skin Kit, most popular. So let's do by newest and Control F and baking. This one is really cool. This one, it doesn't focus on characters, but the concepts are exactly the same. So here, your chunk is just taking you through basically everything there is to know about baking, different scenarios, how to bake pretty complex things. And pros and cons of different techniques. So I highly recommend this course if somebody's interested in that. I'll just leave a link to that here in the chat. Will FlippedNormals add more tutorials for car visualization, I suppose? We don't have any plans to do that internally, but feel free to ask some of our creators if they want to do some of those courses. It's pretty specialized, and we don't really control what the creators do. So honestly, I have no idea if there will be courses on car visualization. Here's an interesting one. Tyler is saying, do you think it's beneficial for new artists to learn Blender with industry-compatible key mappings so they can move on to other softwares and transition faster? Yeah, I have a pretty strong opinion on this, actually. I think industry-compatible hotkeys is a terrible idea. I don't think anyone should really be using them. And the reason is simple, I suppose. If you are learning Blender, it's impossible for you to learn Blender. If you have that, at least it's much harder. And simply because no tutorial uses it, and Blender is uniquely hotkey based. Like Maya uses some hotkeys, but Blender is just so hotkey based. So if you were to follow my tutorials, they might use the shelf or other ways of accessing things. Blender is so hotkey based that if you don't know the hotkey, you actually can't follow the tutorials, meaning it's much harder to learn. So I think if you are learning Blender, I think you should just suck it up and use the standard hotkeys there. And I don't think it's going to make it much easier to learn another software if you are using them, if you're using industry compatible hotkeys anyway. I mean, when you're learning a new software, you just have to accept the realities of that software. If you're going into something like Maya afterwards, you just have to learn those hotkeys. So I would say if you're going into Blender, accept what Blender is. Same if you're using Maya as well. If you're coming into Maya from Blender, you should just accept what it is. You shouldn't try to make Maya into Blender or vice versa. It's use the software for its strengths and don't try to make it into something it's not. You're just trying to force like a square shape into like a circular shape. How much time did you give to sculpting per day when we got started? This is a tricky one because I learned to sculpt over many years when I was a teenager. But when I was a student, I was sculpting like non-stop. I was doing studies and I was really taking it seriously. So, like 5-6 hours at a very, very minimum, which has some fun little side effects, like a completely broken body at the age of 22 because I was sculpting so much. So I had to seriously look into how to treat my arm and such. Lifting weights helped a lot, and doing like general stretches helped a lot. But be aware, if you do start to sculpt a lot, your body will complain. What are your suggestions on how to start learning character sculpting? Let's see here, because I believe I have made a little article on this. We have a, yeah, here we go. I'll send you this article here. This is an article I use for, I wrote on how to become a character artist. Hello, Elpida. My girlfriend is saying hello. So this article here goes through a lot of different things, but if you want to become a good character artist, you just have to get started. Honestly, you just have to start off by doing a lot of character sculpting. But you can't just do that. You can't just practice. You have to practice correctly. One of the best ways of practicing correctly, I think, is to do figure sculpting studies. Then you have some truth to aspire to. If you're just sculpting like this kind of stuff, like I can kind of move the eye up here and you're like, yeah, cool. Or, you can do whatever. And you can kind of justify it. Yeah, this guy here got hit by a bus or something, so it's fine. But if you're doing that with a human, people will be like, wait a minute, that doesn't look like a human at all. So there is some truth in it if you're sculpting a human, which is fantastic because that holds you accountable. Now I can just do whatever I want to, and there is no accountability in it, if that makes any sense. So try to sculpt humans or animals, whatever it is. Try to sculpt something which is heavily reference based. Are wrinkle studies really important? Good question. I haven't thought about that before. I haven't really done wrinkle studies. I don't think you necessarily have to study wrinkles per se. I think you have to do studies of different kinds of people. Like do an old person, do a young person. And by doing that, you kind of accidentally do wrinkle studies. Wrinkle studies, you shouldn't really study wrinkles in that regard. Wrinkles are just skin losing their elasticity, and then they might be compressing or stretching based on that. So it's more understanding how that works instead of just studying wrinkles. And wrinkles can also look so different. If you have if you're looking at like a shaved chimp or something, you look at those wrinkles, or you look at like a baby with wrinkles when they're like compressing certain parts. So you look at an old person, an old man versus an old woman versus a woman who's worked inside her entire life versus somebody who's worked in the sun their entire life. You know, wrinkles are just really, really different. So instead of doing wrinkle studies, do people studies. Do you think Blender will eventually become as much of an industry standard as Maya? It depends. Maya is fantastic in a production environment because it's so customizable and all that. Blender right now is not gonna take over those parts of Maya. It's gonna take over the parts of modeling and general asset work, but it's not gonna take over as the main tool. It will, if it does take over, it's hard to say. It will take a lot of time, because one thing you have to keep in mind as well, you have to retrain the entire industry to use it, and a lot of people have no interest in that. But Blender also has a long way to go to get to the level of Maya right now. In some areas like modeling, it's pretty comparable. You know, one is better than the other, pros and cons. But in a lot of ways, Blender has a significant way to go in order to get to the level of Maya. Is it doable? Potentially, if the developers want to even take it there. Maybe they don't even want to. Hey, ADI. Blender is industry standard in Europe. Ubisoft uses Blender. CD Projekt Red also. Well, that doesn't make it industry standard. That means that some people might be using it in the studios. There's a huge difference between it is the main pipeline tool versus some people using it. There's a huge difference there. So, like for instance, when it seems like whenever there is a movie coming out or a game coming out where somebody used Blender, then there is an article about it. While with Maya, you don't have to do that because every single movie or game will use Maya. So Blender is technically far away from taking over Maya, though it can replace certain parts of it. And just because it can be used for certain things doesn't mean that it's there yet. Because a lot of times what we're talking about is, for instance, Framestore uses Blender in the art department, where, you know, the art department there is really keen on Blender, and that's great, but you're largely working outside of the pipeline, and you have, you are entirely working outside of the pipeline, and it's just a completely different thing. There's a difference between it being able to be used by individual artists versus you have 500 people collaboratively working together. As a Maya user, I look in Blender and I feel Blender is much better than Maya. Am I wrong or right? They're different tools. They're entirely different tools. Like for instance, now I've been working on a tutorial for lighting in Arnold, and that has like a good example there where there's a good difference there. Blender is so much more fun to work with when it comes to lighting, like so much more fun. You can just customize the viewport and everything is just easier there. Like it's easier to move the lights around and it's much more immediate. Arnold is heavy and a bit clunky to work with, which is fantastic, but is one of those better than the other? Well, now we just looked at the advantages of Blender. We didn't look at the advantages of Maya. Now, if I were to render this guy here, that would be much easier and faster to do in Blender, just because it's faster to iterate and faster to put up lights. But what if I was rendering this guy and he was like this large and he was like 30 million polygons with displacement maps, subsurface scattering and all that? In that case, Maya would probably be better, at least if I was going for realism, or Arnold would be better, because Arnold in Maya can just deal with much more data, and it's just more tested when it comes to that. So it's not better or worse. Also in Arnold, you have a lot more features like light linking, just a lot more nodes and a lot more control in general. But it all depends what you want to use. Is a full excavator better than a hammer? No, they're different things. Is learning Substance or Mari enough? How much is Photoshop still used in this for texturing? That's an interesting one. Photoshop is still used, but more for like grading images. It's very useful for that, but you wouldn't be texturing like the old school way of doing it. Textures here. Photoshop is you UV map your mesh, and then you put this into the flat thing into Photoshop, and you do it there. That is not being done today. But it's very much used for grading. But if you are a texture artist, you will most likely spend your days in Painter or in Mari. Painter is gaining following really fast and is improving really fast. But they're different tools. But yeah, I mean, you need to use Photoshop as well. Like that's just one of those like Swiss Army knives. You can, I suppose, technically get away with not using Photoshop, but it's just such a useful tool, and it's not a particularly hard tool to use as well. If you can learn Mari, you can definitely learn Photoshop. Blender is able to handle many polygons now. When do you think we'll be able to handle polygons like Zbrush? I'm not sure if they're working towards that, level of performance, because it's not just being able to handle it in the viewport, it's also like the undo speed as well, which is pretty abysmal right now in Blender. I mean, it will be able to handle that if they prioritize that as a task, but if they're not prioritizing that, it won't really happen. It's one of the areas where Zbrush is much better. It's just general how many polygons it can handle, but with speed, not just purely like, oh, you can render it, but you can actually comfortably work with it. James Chan is asking, what do you think of Siva's face trainer? Is it the end of making fax shapes by hand? I just saw that. It looks crazy cool. The end, probably not. A good starting point? Yeah, probably. Probably, I spoke to a rigger friend of mine, Matthias, about that yesterday. He thought it was really cool, and could probably take you up to like 80% or not. So I think it's really cool. It's really interesting because it's one of the first like applications where I've seen machine learning being used there, apart from like in 3D in a real practical sense, apart from just pure noise reduction. Also, as a little heads up as well, for people who are new to the stream, we just launched a Black Friday sale today. So everything on the FlippedNormals marketplace is currently 50% off. At least most things on the marketplace is 50% off. All the FlippedNormals products are. So, if there's something here you've been eyeing, feel free to check it out. Like, we have some really nice bundles, which you might really enjoy. Like, we have Introduction to Sculpting. We have the Intro to Maya, Intro to Blender. And we have just a lot of really cool products, which I think you might enjoy. So let's jump back here. Creatorium, hey guys, nice seeing you. If you haven't heard from you guys in a while, Creatorium is a creator on the marketplace, which makes a lot of really cool things. Really excited to see more products. Which skills are future-proof according to you? That's an interesting one. Let's separate between basics versus fundamentals here. This is something we've been talking about before. Fundamentals are more like timeless skills, and basics are more like technical skills. You can Google a basic skill. You can't Google a fundamental skill. Fundamental skills will always be needed. Good understanding of design, anatomy, shape, color, composition, color theory. Those kind of things will always be useful. Skills, more technical skills that will be very, very useful going forward is Houdini. Like I wrote this on Twitter not too long ago. Like I've never seen an unemployed Houdini artist. Grooming as well. Grooming is one of those things that I keep telling people to become groomers and nobody does it. Grooming just means that you're working with hair systems and you are making grooms for characters. This can be fur, it can be like hair, it can be all sorts of different things on characters. The reason that is kind of future-proof is, well, first off, it's not going anywhere. Second off, the tools are not that great, and nobody really knows that you can become a groomer. If you want to get a job, you can probably walk into a lot of different studios if you know how to do grooming really well. How can I improve my likeness sculpting? That is a great question. It's really tricky. Likeness sculpting is one of those things we don't really do here with FlippedNormals because it's pretty tricky to do. And there's a lot of just matching up back and forth. First, make sure that the issues you're having with likeness sculpting are indeed likeness issues and not sculpting issues. So I keep just repeating myself here, but learn figure sculpting, learn portrait sculpting. If you want to be good at likeness, you have to be a good portrait sculptor first. You need to understand how the different shapes work, how generally the face works. Learn how to make good shapes. Then find good reference images. Portraits are just uniquely hard, or likeness it's just uniquely hard to do because you need such good reference images. So find proper reference images and work with those. Which course on FlippedNormals Marketplace would you recommend for a person who's just getting into characters? That is a great question. I recommend a few here. I believe we have a whole bundle for that. Let's see. Let's go here. I'll just turn up the music. We have a little bit of ambient here. This one. I recommend this course here, this bundle here. This one contains a lot of I made half the courses here, so I shouldn't toot my own horn too much. But it contains a lot of high quality education when it comes to Zbrush. I also recommend this course as well, Introduction to Sculpting. This focuses a lot on how to improve your sculpting. It contains some basics on how to operate some specific tools in Zbrush, but it's really a fundamentals course. It's really a course on now you will learn how sculpting actually works, which is really hard. So yeah, Introduction to Sculpting, Introduction to Zbrush as well. I really spent a lot of time on Introduction to Sculpting, really trying to figure out what do people need to learn. So I think that's a pretty decent course. At least I gave it my best, and it's been pretty well reviewed. So I think it's a pretty useful course. What are the criteria to be accepted as a FlippedNormals creator? What with respect to portfolio and experience? You have to. Your work has to be well presented, but also just has to be of a standard that people want to buy. If it's not to a high technical standard where we don't think people will be interested commercially in it, then it won't be accepted. But if your work is well presented and it looks like the products are good, then you'll be accepted. It's not like FlippedNormals is this like crazy exclusive club where only like the most elite sellers can go there or can be a part of it. You have to be of a decent skill level, but you don't have to be like top 10% in the world. As long as we believe that your products will sell, then it will be accepted. I'm sculpting the Rock for like 2 days, but it doesn't look like him at all. What am I missing? Yeah, I mean, tricky, right? It could be either that you're missing core skills when it comes to fundamental portraiture, or it can be that you just haven't found the right reference images yet for it. When it comes to portraits, if you really want to make that right, I recommend not just sculpting like this, but take this into Blender or Maya or Max, whatever. Have image planes. Try to match up the camera, the focal length as close as you can. if you can even find what the original one is, and then use those and export back and forth. Gianna was asking, I'm trying to get a job as a Houdini groom artist. Do you have any tips on making my first portfolio, such as the number of pieces or subject matter? This is where, I'm not a groomer, and it would be incredibly arrogant for me to give the exact portfolio you should have. I recommend reaching out to some professional groomers and simply asking them. Just out of the top of my head, I would, find them on LinkedIn or ArtStation, but out of the top of my head, show variation, show a few kinds of grooms, show long hair, short hair, different hairstyles, different kinds of characters, but don't just make a portfolio without having consulted with a professional, because you're spending a lot of time on your portfolio. You need to know what kind of stuff they're looking for. Here's a good question. I'm pretty new to sculpting. Tell me, is it better to practice sculpting by making my own base mesh, or should I use DAS Genesis and practice on that? If you want to get better at sculpting, it's better to not make your own base mesh. It's better to start from a sphere. Just start from a sphere like this and just sculpt. The reason that is a good idea is because you have to solve a lot of very, very hard problems. If you already have a base mesh, you are cheating yourself out of such good learning opportunities. You need to learn how something works at a deep level before you can really start with base meshes. Base meshes are for when you need to work fast, because it's much, much, much easier. So sculpt from spheres, sculpt from C-spheres, like Dynamite Sculptors Pro it, but don't just jump straight into it, because you're doing yourself a massive disservice. Once you know how to sculpt something from a sphere, then you can start to use base meshes, but don't just start with that. That's going to, you're gonna have technically better looking models if you start from base meshes, but you're only for time being. You really have to learn how to sculpt from spheres. You have to learn to sculpt properly. It's not there's something magical about the sphere. What's magical about that is that you will truly understand where your limits are as a sculptor. Hey, do you guys ever miss working in the industry? I sometimes miss when my job was just sit down and sculpt for some time with texture. It was really fun doing that, sculpting, like working on this kind of stuff. Like I was doing similar things in the industry. It's really fun. I don't miss enough to go back, because now we're running our own company, which is a lot of fun, and has a lot more freedom and allows me to reach a much bigger audience. It allows me to help people, which is something I really enjoy, just because it's so rewarding when you're seeing people lives are actually being improved. So no, I don't miss it enough to want to go back. Have you ever done hard surface sculpting? I am not a big fan of doing hard surface sculpting. I find it not to be very enjoyable. I know Morten has been doing a fair bit of that, and he thinks it's really cool. But it's not my kind of thing. If I do hard surface modeling, I'll fire up something like Blender or Maya, and I'll do like old school polygonal modeling. I just find that to be a lot easier. How long did it take you to make your Thanos sculpt? Well, I have never sculpted Thanos before, or Morten has. I don't actually know. A couple of days probably. I actually don't know exactly how long it took. For somebody wanting to be a character artist for the animation industry, should I only be doing stylized characters, or should I also be doing some high detailed creatures, for example? This goes back into the whole talk to people who are doing exactly that. That said, I don't think there is any point in doing something like this if you want to work at Pixar or Disney. Figure out what they want and then do that. You're never going to do this kind of stuff, like something highly realistic working for those companies. So figure out what, like, it would be the same thing. Would you want a Pixar character if you want to work for ILM or NPC? You wouldn't. Manav is saying, I've been trying to sculpt stylized heads, but all the roadblocks just hit me and I'm tempted to use a base mesh. Yeah, I mean, at some point as well, you might be so frustrated and you just want some nice results. In that case, use a base mesh if that helps you. But just be aware that, at some point you will have to just embrace your fears and learn to sculpt from scratch, like properly from scratch. But yeah, I'm also very sympathetic with feeling really stuck and knowing you have a tool that can help you. Sometimes you just want to get the cool result, and I wouldn't judge anyone for wanting to use a base mesh. Any advice on growing 3D? Any advice on growing a 3D educational YouTube channel? I mean, we were doing this for some years now. One of the things that some advice if you want to become a good 3D artist, I suppose, be consistent. If you make one video and you expect that video to go crazy well, you're not gonna make it. We have like, I don't even know how many videos we have, like 300 videos or something. You need to just have a significant amount of videos, and you just need to do it on a regular basis. We don't monitor each video how well it's doing. Of course, we have stats on that, but it's not like, oh, this video didn't do well, we're not going to do another one. No, you just do a lot of videos. And also what we're trying to do as well, it's really important to me when I'm making videos, is, are the videos relevant? I'm not just sitting there and trying to come up with ideas. Oh, this would be cool. I'm thinking more, what issues did I genuinely have and how can I solve those in a video? So that's why some people seem to enjoy our videos, because they're highly specific towards real world problems. They're not just, oh, here's another tips and tricks video found in Max because we went through documentation. They're things that we think are actually useful. And then keep it simple, go straight to the point. If you're gonna have a video on texturing something, don't go through the modeling, just jump straight to the texturing and keep it simple. When you are a beginner in sculpting, do you have a mentor, or do you think it's better to have one or just learning on the internet? I mean, if you can find a mentor, that is so useful. We have a FlippedNormals Discord, which is really cool. A bunch of very talented people there. Let's see if we can find a link to that. I'll post a link to that right now. So it's really useful to have people who can help you. It's hard to have a formal mentorships. We do offer that as well, but I'm the one doing it for the moment, and I only have 2 spots, so obviously it's pretty small, a pretty small audience there. But I mean, try to find somebody who can help you. That's going to help you a crazy amount. I'll also just send a link to our mentorship page as well. This is where you can sign up as well if you're interested in the future, though there aren't any spots for a few months now, I believe. Do you think character artists will be able to make a living creating custom characters, avatars for the metaverse? That is a very good question. I think there's going to be more and more jobs for character artists, where some people might request highly specific characters for different things. I think there is going to be a lot of positions which we can't even see at this point. I mean, Meta, now formerly Facebook, they were actively looking for character artists. So I think there's going to be more and more work. So in short, yes. How can I make a good portfolio with a potato laptop? Good question. If you're doing characters, like if you want to do a character portfolio, it depends entirely what you want to do. It's pretty hard if you need something computer intensive. But if you are doing characters like this, Zbrush runs basically on a potato. I used to run Zbrush on my 2006 laptop, back in the day. It runs on not a lot of power. If you need power for rendering, you can always, hire render farms. You can get like free credits for different render farms, or if you need credits, they're not that expensive. So if you need to render something out, don't underestimate how available render farms can actually be. Or you can potentially ask some friends, or maybe somebody in a Discord community if you can actually rent, or if they can render something out for you as well. K Sorman 1 is saying, I just purchased your intro to Maya. It's only $30. Thanks, guys. Thanks, man. I appreciate that. Intro to Maya is like 12 hours long and really contains most things you need to learn about Maya. I mean, I made that, so I'm a bit biased, but I think it's a really good course. I think the advantage of something like a course like Intro to Maya compared to like watching videos on YouTube or, you know, in class teaching is that it's one course. You just watch all the videos and you get a really good grasp of Maya, and they're all straight to the point. It's done by, you know, one teacher, by myself, and we cut away all the unnecessary stuff. There aren't any like funny anecdotes going on for 30 minutes. There aren't any like crazy big mistakes in it. You know, we cut away everything to make it streamlined. So I think there's a huge advantage to courses like that. And you don't have to go hunting for it. We go through what's useful and only that. If there is a video on it, it's a useful feature. If there's not a video on it, you know, probably it's not something you need. Let's see if we can find a link to Intro to Maya as well. While I'm doing that, there was a question. How do you, let's see what that question was. How do you survive on, sorry, my references in a way. How to survive on YouTube by sculpting characters? I don't think you can. I don't think you can survive on YouTube by sculpting characters. YouTube is not a place you can make a living unless you have like millions of subs. If you only have, we have 253,000, I think, you are not making a living on that. Here is Intro to Maya. I'm posting that in the chat now. Any tips when you hit a plateau and don't see any progress? Yeah, this was a question we had earlier as well. And that is, once that happens, I mean, first maybe take a little break. And also you might actually be making progress, just that your artistic eye hasn't caught up yet. But if it is the case that you are truly stagnating, get feedback on your work. Get feedback on your work and do studies. You know, there is a time for working on things and just grinding and getting better. And then there is a time for just sitting back and just doing studies. That can unlock a whole new world where you just now focus on actually getting better, not just doing work, but you're observing in a whole new way. So I recommend really doing studies. Marco CB is saying thank you for the videos. Well, thank you so much. I appreciate that. Michael Alvarez. Hey, Michael. I haven't seen you in a while. What do you think of Modo these days? Do you still use it? I haven't used Modo in years now, to be honest. It kind of felt like it was stagnating. It might not have. I haven't really used it for years. It used to be like my favorite 3D tool. And then I think what stopped me using Modo was that I got a job in the industry. And while Modo might have been a little bit faster at modeling, Maya got good. Really fast, to the point that modeling was fairly comparable into software, and Maya became a little bit better at certain things, particularly UVs and retopology and such. And the problem if you're working in the industry is the whole thing like Blender debate as well. Should you use Maya or Blender in a pipeline? Well, let's say for sake of argument, say that Blender was 10% faster than Maya. It's not. It depends on the artist, but let's just say for argument it is. But if you were to use Blender now in a production, it's a tricky one because you're working in a pipeline, and the pipeline is Maya based. You might have a lot of tags associated with it, like primars, all the kind of stuff associated with the model. Just for the work in a pipeline, you might have cameras just set up specifically with image planes. Let's say you have 200 cameras you have to line up. You can't just export that in and out. If you have complicated pieces of geo as well, complicated hierarchies, it just becomes very tricky to go back and forth between something like Modo, Blender, or Maya. So for me, almost even if Modo was a little bit faster or Blender was a bit faster, it's not faster when you take everything into account. The way I like to think about it is the whole like, if you do everything in Maya, you can estimate how long it's going to take. But if you do it in Modo or Blender or anything like that, and you have to take it into Maya, you might have a whole mystery variable of what if something goes wrong, and that is a variable I'm not very comfortable with. Is there any reason to keep Studio Max in a pipeline when Maya is present? I mean, Max is a fantastic modeler. The modifier stack is amazing. I really enjoy working with that. Max is a fantastic tool. Where the future of Max is, I actually don't know. For me, it feels like Max is a bit of an underrated tool, to be honest. I used it recently. You know, we had an artist making an introduction to Max for us, which is a really good course. And I was using Max, but then I hadn't used it for 10 years. And I was just reminded of how good Max actually was. It's not as flexible as Maya, but it's a legit good tool. But if I could choose between Max and Maya, I would definitely pick Maya, like basically every time. But Max is still a fantastic tool. What do you think is the future of Blender versus Maya in the industry? I think Blender is going to get better fast, and then I think at some point studios are going to start using it more. It was what I was saying before, that it's like every time you hear somebody use Blender, there's a mention of it, and every time, but you wouldn't have to do that for Maya, because everything is used. Like every single TV show or movie or anything uses Maya, like almost without exception. But I think a lot of more studios are going to start using Blender. Blender is still lacking, like really lacking in a lot of areas. You start realizing this once you try to do something highly specific in it. But where it's lacking, the studio is going to have to make scripts and plugins or maybe some additional software for it. And the tools they're being using, I think they're going to be distributing back to the community. And now suddenly, those issues are being solved, and now more studios are going to start picking up Blender because now another studio just solved those things. So I think there might be a moment where it hits like critical mass. Like it's almost like the snowball is now rolling down a hill and it cannot be stopped, just because now the studios themselves have developed the solutions they need, and they might even be collaborating on some of them. And instead of 10 studios making the same features, they might just be like, look, everyone needs these same features, so let's just keep on, let's just develop them together. You know, almost like what's happening with like USD, like the Universal Scene Descriptor, I think it's called, Alembic, all those kind of things. So if I was a betting man and I had to bet on Maya versus Blender, which one is used the most in 10 years, you know, I would put my money on Blender. Hey, Mandarin. Nice seeing you here. What are the main points Blender needs to overtake Maya in your opinion? Oh boy, it needs a lot of things. A lot of the things there are, it's not necessarily like one big feature here and there. It needs a significant amount of refinement in like so many ways. Like one thing that like some friends and I would keep talking about is like it just needs groups. It just needs some ways of working with grouping. Doing like scene organizations today is actually quite painful, just because of you have to use collections. You don't have stuff like light linking, which makes lighting quite tricky if you need some specificity. It's just missing a lot of things, and the UX, I really don't find the UX in Blender to be good. It's so hotkey based. It just feels like it needs a serious upgrade. I know I've been reading in the documents on one of the like Blender developer pages on the future of it, and they're saying that they're looking for like a senior UX designer, which is good. If it gets a senior UX designer to work on it, I think it can improve significantly. But I really, really, really think it needs that. The animation tools in Blender are very lacking. Yeah, that's what I've heard as well. You know, you can do interesting things, but it seems like a lot of areas are severely underdeveloped. But you know, it's also pretty incredible what you can do with it. It's an open source tool. And so I'm very impressed by it. But something like Maya has been developed in conjunction with industry people for a very, very long time. You can tell that Maya has a lot of very specific tools for a lot of very specific needs. Blender, on the other hand, is fantastic at concepting. Like it beats Maya just like hands down. I don't think there's any way Maya would be better at Blender at concepting. How possible is it to be purely a creature modeler? Well, it's very possible. I mean, that's basically what I was doing. I wasn't, well, not technically just a model. I was also doing a lot of texturing as well. But creature artist, I mean, absolutely possible. If you are working in a major studio or if you're freelance and you are good at doing creatures, I mean, absolutely you can. You just, like, the harsh truth is you have to be good at what you're doing. You have to be able to make good creatures. I mean, in my case, both for modeling and for texturing. But, you know, that's a solvable problem. You know, no matter where you are from in the world, you can learn that. Like think about this. Every single person who knows anything didn't used to know that thing. I can do creature modeling. I mean, this guy is pretty rough now, but you know, give him enough time and he's gonna look fine. But I didn't used to know this. Like, there was very much a time where I didn't know how to make this, and then now I do. It wasn't because I read a book or something, or like I didn't magically develop some skills for this. I just did it a lot of times for a long time, and I asked for feedback from people who were able to put me in the right direction. When do you think is the right time to start detailing when sculpting? Once you have your mid-frequency right. Like mid-frequency is like this kind of stuff, these kind of things and all that. And once the sculpt is refined, don't add pores and scales or anything like that until the design, until first the design is working, but until the mid-frequency is working. Get mid-frequency right, and really everything else starts to follow. There's a small series called Maya and a Tree. They all made it in Blender. Yeah, I've heard about that, but I haven't actually seen it. Is it all made in Blender, or just parts made in Blender? Because honestly, making a whole thing in Blender sounds extremely painful. I couldn't imagine doing a collaborative rendering, like rendering like hundreds or maybe thousands of shots in Blender. That would be painful, I think. I mean, just like it would be painful to do it in Maya as well. You need like specialized tools like Houdini or Katana or something like that, or Clarice, like something for managing that. Pretty hardcore if they actually did that in Blender, all of it. Are you using a mouse or are you using a tablet? I'm very much using a tablet here. I also have like a pen display, so you know, I can sculpt directly on the screen. That is now my second monitor, and I'm using a regular Wacom tablet here. If I need to learn Zbrush fast, how do I do it? The UI is weird. Yeah, it's pretty weird. The way I would do it is I would search on YouTube for, let's see if I can find it for you. YouTube, FlippedNormals, Zbrush tutorial. Because we have like a 1 hour tutorial on how to, yeah, there we go. Here it is. I would watch this one. This one here shows you basically all the things you need to you do in Zbrush. You don't have to interface or use the interface too much, to be honest. Yeah, yes, of course you have to know where things are, but you kind of using this menu here, and then you're using everything, a few of the drop downs under tool. Most things are, none of this you will really be touching apart from a few of them. So, you know, keep it simple. The trick to learning Zbrush is to not be overwhelmed. I wish I could make a custom version of Zbrush where all of this crap was just thrown away, where it was like a simplified version of Zbrush, because it's insane. Also, I realized I haven't been saving at all, so I should probably save this guy. Let's see here. Dinosaur stream. There we go. Question from Legis. Is Mudbox relevant these days? You know, it's not really relevant, to be honest. It hasn't been updated in a very long time. It still has some fantastic features that Zbrush really doesn't have. But as a whole, it feels like abandonware, which is unfortunate. I wish you could have a mix between Zbrush and Mudbox. That'd be fantastic. But we can't. Do you use any custom brushes or normal brushes only? I am using the Clay Builder brush. and with the Alpha 06 with this guy right here. You can also just disable the Alpha and you have something real nice. I mean, honestly, that's what I've been using for 95% of this sculpt. Why is Zbrush so expensive anyway to get it cheaper? You should check out resellers for Zbrush. You don't have to buy Zbrush directly from Pixology. You can buy it from resellers as well, and those resellers might have sales on it. If they don't have sales, then no, there's no way to get it cheaper, apart from like the other versions like Zbrush Core or whatever they're called. Hi, do I need to rig my characters to make my portfolio stand out for character role? You don't have to rig it, but it's helpful if you post them. And you can post them in a myriad of different ways. You can post it in Zbrush. You can use what is called like Mixamo to post your character or to rig your characters. You can use auto riggers, or you can just brute force post it in Zbrush. It really helps to have a pose for your character, but you don't have to rig it yourself. Like nobody cares if you can rig your character. The only thing that helps there is, does it look nicer in the end? Which it doesn't look nice if it's rigged, but it looks nicer if it's post. And what do you think about the clay brush? Clay brush is cool. I used to use only the clay brush, I think, before they added the build-up brush. You know, clay brush is awesome. It allows you to really nicely like define planes and all that. I just prefer the clay build-up brush. For me, the clay build-up brush is like the brush. It's like the ultimate brush in ZBrush. Manav Gala is saying, I have immense respect for side effects because they give a free learning edition without any time limit. Yeah, I mean, same. I think all the big companies should be doing something like a personal learning edition. What side effect is doing is fantastic with Houdini. I am pretty surprised that that's not available for Maya or Max right now, because you know, if you're learning and you have the choice between Blender, Houdini, which you know you can get for free, you know, with the learning edition of Houdini, or you can pay a lot of money for Max or Maya. Even with the indie versions of Max and Maya, you know, you still have to pay a fair bit, and just any cost is a barrier of entry. I mean, if you're starting a new hobby and you see that it's like $250 per year for that versus $0 per year. I mean, $250 per year for a hobby is not a trivial amount of money. Will I be able to land a senior level job in coming years without a degree? I mean, I don't know anything about level design, but in general, like, studios do not really care about your degree. One of the reasons is because you have plenty of people with degrees which are not very good at their jobs, and plenty of people without degrees who are amazing at their jobs. You need to be good at what you're doing. Worry less about a degree. Reasons for getting a degree could be getting a visa, or some places it might, maybe there is a baseline for your salary because of your degree as well. Yeah, I think the name is Sean Chai. The problem with Maya is how to justify the spending that much when you're just starting. That's exactly what I'm talking about. You know, like, even if you're getting the indie version, which, you know, there might be a regional pricing there as well. I'm not sure how much it is in India compared to like the UK or US, but regardless, it is a lot of money to spend when you're just getting started. I think like 3D software should be free if you're not making money on it, and then you can charge people. I think the companies who do not allow that, I mean, they can do whatever they want to, but I think the market economy is going to, you know, kind of punish them for it. I think the market is going to decide that the people who do it for free, or all the people who give you a learning version for free, that's going to be the software people are going to be using. Greg, thanks for watching. I appreciate that. Blender is better than Maya. Now, are you trying to trigger me here? Are you trying to get me to do a little rant again? because I will not fall for that little trick. Yeah, I think a lot of people now, since like Blender 2.8 came out, are moving to Blender, just because it does exactly what they need to do. They might be sick of using Maya, so for them it might be a double win. They might prefer the software more, and also it's free, and they don't have to worry about the Autodesk Death Squad coming after them. This is like what Adam is saying here. Hey, a friend of introduced me to your channel 2 years ago, and then I'm going to start on Blender. I'm a graphic designer, but Blender has been a pivotal skill in landing me a first agency job. That's exactly it. What I mean as well, Blender is for a lot of people, learning like Blender isn't. It's not that you go from Maya to Blender. It's that you go from not having 3D in your arsenal to having Blender, to now having 3D in it. Just the fact that there is so much less friction in getting the tool can just help you so much. And that allows you to, like I was writing on this on Twitter recently as well, that one of the best things about Blender is, like, regardless of what you feel about the software, it's just like, it's almost like democratized 3D in a sense. Like it's made it available to so many more people, where you don't have to have a lot of money to even try out something like Maya, or it's just so much easier. So many people here are going to start with 3D because of Blender, regardless of it being better or not than some other software. It's almost like irrelevant if it's better or not. Better for what? How transferable is Blender to Maya? I mean, the fundamentals of 3D are the same. Both Morten and I were able to move from Maya to Blender. You know, it's painful. It's always painful to learn new software, but we're able to do it, you know, with relative ease. So if you know one 3D software, it's not that hard to switch. The hardest thing is to learn your first 3D software. That is legit tough, just because there are a whole new set. It's not just like technical skills. It's a whole new like set of artistic skills you have to learn as well. You have to understand so many new things. Like if you're drawing, you don't have to really be concerned with like specular roughness or GI or metalness or topology or anything like that. Well, once you know that, if you know what metalness or topology or the displacement map is, now you're just kind of moved to another software. The way I like to think about switching software is you're working in a workshop. Like let's say you're a mechanic and you have your mechanic workshop, and you know where everything is and you know what all tools are. And now you get a job in a different workshop, and for some reason, a different country or something, and they call the tools by different names and they put them on different shelves. Still, the tools still do the same. Maybe they have some slight differences in their labels and stuff, but they're fundamentally the same tools. That's moving 3D software. The tools do fundamentally the same thing, and they're different in different spots. So that's what you have to learn. So all the muscle memory, your wrench used to be to your left of your hand, and now it's to the right. Crap, you have to relearn that. But you know, that just takes a little bit of time. It's not that tricky to go from one software to another once you know a 3D software. If you've already learned one 3D software, that is a challenge. Moving 3D software is not that challenging. Is it possible to become a creature artist without knowing too much human anatomy? I mean, possible. The thing with anatomy is that there is a lot of comparable anatomy between human anatomy and creature anatomy. I always recommend starting off with humans, just because, you know, that's more accessible. We have a lot more resources on human anatomy than we do on animal anatomy, and you can use yourself as reference. I recommend, if you want to be a creature artist, to not like cheap out on your skills. Don't just go, no, it's easier to not learn human anatomy, so I'm just going to focus on animals. Focus on learning human anatomy, and then you can translate that to being a creature artist. But technically, you know, if you're doing a lion, you're not using human anatomy, you're using lion anatomy. It's just that the lion anatomy could be based on human anatomy. You know, once you understand human anatomy of figure sculpting, it's kind of the same thing, just different proportions and some different muscles. you understand that. Well, everyone, they would have muscles and bones and fat and skin. They're just in different spots, and now you just have to study where those different spots are, the different proportions. Yeah, Tyler is saying anatomy is super important and not that long to learn. It's like a tricky thing, right? Like anatomy is something you can keep learning for the rest of your life, but you know, learn the basics of it, and then keep sculpting, and then you learn something for every new sculpt you do. What you realize as well is that you starting off learning anatomy, and now you know how the human body works. And then for every single sculpt you do, you learn something new, and then you realize that everyone is so different. And while what you learned about anatomy is of course useful, you just have to observe from real life, because there is no such thing as a generic human. Every single person is different. We have, you know, just like the length of bones determines so many things. It determines your height. It determines so many things. So you need. So while you want to understand anatomy, you realize that, well, you just have to observe the real world as well. What thing in anatomy is the most hard for you to learn? Was it forearms or legs? The back and forearms. The back or arms in general. The forearm is tricky because you have stuff rotating there. You have two bones and they rotate around each other, and there's a lot of variation. The back, just because of it's the back. The scapula is tricky. The spine is tricky. There is just a lot of complexity there. Legs are a bit easier, and if you struggle with legs, just put pants on your character, and you solve that issue. All your characters are shirtless, but with pants on. Pro tip from FlippedNormals. So just a quick heads up that our Black Friday sale is very much ongoing, with most products on the entire site being 50% off now. So if you've been eyeing something like all the sculpting courses, you can get that now for like 50% off. You can get Intro to Zbrush, where you'll learn all the things there. Introduction to Sculpting, where I'm teaching you how to sculpt from scratch. And Introduction to Maya as well, along with Intro to Max and Intro to Painter and Intro to Blender. We have a lot of different courses for that. Brock Rock is saying, forearms are a menace. That's a pretty good way of putting it. They are basically a menace. Forearms are tricky because there is a lot of stuff going on there. Like the way I like to think about it, once you think you understand forearm or back anatomy, you don't understand forearm or back anatomy. The moment you think you understand it, then somebody rotates their hand and you're like, oh man, I didn't understand that at all. Yeah, Amy is asking, why did Autodesk make 2 3D software? Yeah, they bought Maya from Alias. I think it was like 2006 or something like that. I'm not entirely sure. Quite some time ago. And then they also bought Rest in Peace Sweet Prince Soft Image, or XSI. For those who don't know, XSI was a fantastic 3D software made by a company called Soft Image. And then Autodesk bought the entire company, renamed the software to Soft Image, and then closed it. So it's the whole Autodesk buys XSI and closes it, which I'm really bummed out about. It was a fantastic software, but yeah, I guess they realized they didn't need to. Yeah, Soft Image was years ahead of a lot of different software in some ways. It was fantastic software. Yeah, press F to show your respect to XSI. Any tips for refining blobby shapes to good-looking shapes in ZBrush? Yes, smooth them out. Smooth out the shapes and kind of start from scratch and work with the clay buildup brush with no alpha. And then work over them with a low intensity, like this. You can really just soften off the shapes. I prefer not to use a smooth brush too much, and instead I just prefer to use a like the clay brush with a low C intensity, and you can really just refine the shapes. Whenever I'm at a good stage in model, I tend to just zoom in and just go over the shapes properly with a low intensity. Never understood why Microsoft sold Softimage. Yeah, that's like 20 years ago or something. Yeah, Microsoft used to own Softimage back in the day, and then they sold it. I heard from somebody that Autodesk basically killed Mudbox. Yeah, you know, they bought it from a company called Sky Matter, and they who were developing Mudbox, and then they kind of forgot about it, which is a real shame, because Mudbox is still a great software. The sculpting is not particularly good. The sculpting we need a lot of love, but the interface and the UX is so much easier to work with than ZBrush. It takes me an hour to teach somebody how to use ZBrush, like the most basics of it, and they have to take a lot of notes. I've taught somebody how to use Mudbox in like 5 minutes before, and they're like, yeah, I get it now. It just kind of makes sense. Well, ZBrush doesn't really make sense. You have to use basically road memory for it. You have to remember how to do it. Oh, how do I save? Well, it's obviously documents and save. Oh crap, that didn't work. That kind of destroyed my model. Okay, so it's project and then it's file and then save. Yes, but. So it's a tool and save. Yes, but. So, you know, ZBrush is tricky like that. So yeah, F for Mudbox as well. What brushes do you use when making hard surface stuff like mechs? First, one good one, which is good to use. Let's make some quick stuff here. This is not going to be great by any means, but you can use the clay brushes to quickly develop some shapes, just so you can develop some stuff here. And then you can use Trim Dynamic, BTD, and now you can just create some nice clean shapes like this. And then you can use H Polish to really polish this shape up, B and H. Used to be B and H, it is still B and H, I just added a custom brushes here. So now you can really just get these nice sharp edges here. So that can be clay brushes to block out volume, Trim Dynamic to block out or to give you nice planes, and then H Polish to create nice, clean, sharp lines like this. Those three can really take you quite far. Yeah, Fiction is saying, I know Ian Spriggs used Mudbox and his portraits are some of the most realistic I've seen. Absolutely. I mean, Mudbox is fantastic in a lot of ways. Mudbox, like I would still use Mudbox. I used to use Mudbox in industry when I left it, just because it has a lot of power. So it's not bad at all. The only thing that's bad about it is, well, the sculpting could be a lot better, but it's definitely doable. It's just the fact that it doesn't seem to be actively managed yet. What's the reason Pixology has not revamped the ZBrush UI to be more intuitive? Yeah. Who knows? I wish I knew that. Yeah, the interface of ZBrush hasn't really changed at all in years, which is fantastic if you're making tutorials with ZBrush, because those guys basically just don't go out of date. There might be some new features added, but that's one of the advantages, right? For instance, if you have something like Intro to ZBrush. This came out 2 years ago now, and we had recently a question like, is this still up to date? I'm like, yeah, absolutely it is. All the features are still relevant, just because they aren't really changing the interface. You can see it's 2020 versus 2022, but that's fine. And did my dissertation is on high cost and character creation pipeline program versus low end. How do you think Mudbox measures against ZBrush? Well, there are a lot of words in that statement. I think you have to specify a little bit what you mean with that. But just the last part of the question: how do you think Mudbox measures against ZBrush? Pros: significantly easier to learn, much better layer features. Better in a pipeline. You can import texture maps with UDIMs. So for instance, if you have a whole character like this, let's say you have the whole dinosaur, and this guy was in 50 UDIMs, you can import texture maps on top of him, and you can sculpt on top of that, which is fantastic. You also have more power when it comes to exporting displacement maps as well. Cons: not really in development. Much worse texturing, or much worse sculpting tools. Pro of Mudbox, better texture tools. I forgot about that. Much better texture tools. Mudbox has some of the best hand painting tools on the market, actually, which is really interesting. So I would often like paint masks and such directly in Mudbox, because you want to do those, like hand paint those. Bit of a pain to do than in Zbrush, and bit of a pain to do this in like most software, to be honest. How do you feel about people using purchased assets for their art? Is this okay or frowned upon? As the owner of a marketplace where you can purchase assets, everyone should do that. No, but seriously, if you purchase assets for your art, depends entirely what you want. If you are purchasing a character model and you're claiming to be a character artist, you know, if you put in your portfolio, not great, because obviously now, you know, you didn't make that character, and that's dishonest and doesn't show a good skill set. But if you're doing it for your art, let's say you're doing it for more like fine art, if you enjoy lighting or shading something, if you really just want to do lighting studies and you bought a pre-made environment, go for that. Honestly, if you don't have to spend all your time modeling and you can just get right to what you enjoy doing, do that. I have nothing against people using pre-made assets, as long as you didn't claim you made them yourself. But it depends what your end goal is. If your end goal is a pretty image, then honestly, who cares? Is retopology for 3D printing on CNC OBJ output necessary at all? No. If you're doing something like 3D printing, just export out an OBJ, decimate your model, export it out, and obviously prepare it for 3D printing on CNC. But topology, yes. So let's talk a little bit about topology here. Topology is a way of optimizing your model. You can optimize either the performance when it comes to deformation, or you can optimize the poly count so that you can have approximately a similar shape but a lower poly count. Do you care about that when you're doing 3D printing? Most likely not. Topology is really a tool for, like in most cases, topology for characters is to make better deformation. So don't overthink it. If you're not deforming your character, don't worry too much about good topology. Worry if your shapes are good, and it makes UVing easier and that kind of stuff. But for a lot of my characters, I just kind of go to geometry, see your mesh around it, just click this little guy, and that would work. So don't overthink topology. Topology is always a tool for optimizing your model. And do you care about what you want to optimize it for? Here's from Ritik Rai. If I texture a character in A pose and then pose in a Zbrush, will the textures work fine? Yes, but if your character is stretching a lot, then there's going to be stretching in your textures as well. But if you just take a character and you just pose it up, then it's going to work fine. That would be equivalent to a character being rigged and then just being a rigged character being textured and then just like animating it. That would work totally fine. Be aware that Zbrush does not support importing UDIMs. So if you have a character, like let's say this part here was a UDIM and this part here was not a UDIM, you can't import both at the same time, which is really annoying. That was the bane of my existence when I was doing this kind of work professionally. Now I don't care too much about it, but yeah. But to sell a character model, it's better with good topology. If you want to, obviously from the discussion we had before, if you want to sell like a character somewhere, or you want to sell a base mesh, or if you're making a portfolio with characters, spend the time on good topology. Like is what I said you optimize for, right? If you're a character artist and you want to get a job doing that, well, now you're optimizing for getting a job. And what helps you to get a job is good, clean topology. How do you approach texturing a character for games? Would you use vertex painting in Zbrush or texturing in Substance? You wanna paint in you wanna texture this in Substance. Vertex painting definitely has a place, but that's more for like concepting. Problem with vertex painting is that every single vertex has now a color. It's called poly painting, but it's vertex painting. So this means that if you want to have if you want to have a 4K map, you need a minimum of 16 million polygons, because that's 4,000 by 4,000. So for really any kind of painting or texturing, you want to use Painter. You don't really want to texture in Zbrush. There are some people who can do it or prefer doing it, but you have objectively more control in Painter. Like you control the roughness, the metallicness, the specular amount, all these kind of things. You can control it directly in Painter. While here, you really can't control a lot. Though Painter or vertex painting and polar painting in Zbrush can be pretty decent for hand painting. If you need to have some very specific colors in some areas, I prefer to use Zbrush for that, because it's a little bit weird, but it's called Substance Painter, but it should almost be like material designer or like material painter, because it's not actually particularly good at hand painting. Like color picking is really not intuitive. So if you want to actually hand paint something, I far prefer doing that in Mudbox or in Zbrush. Like if I was doing like an arcane style character, I would have probably painted that whole thing in Mudbox and then brought it into Painter and Zbrush to like do like auxiliary maps and combine it all. But the pure hand painting, I would have most likely done in Mudbox, just because the pure hand painting is so much better there. Yeah, Fiction is saying, well, I had a character with UDIMs and I was able to import it, sculpt high poly and extract displacement maps. Yes, you can. What I'm talking about when it comes to Zbrush not accepting UDIMs is texture maps, meaning that if this character here had 10 UDIMs right now, I could extract displacement maps from it. That would be totally fine. But if I paint those maps if I painted color maps in Painter, and let's say those color maps had like some kind of pattern like this on it, and I want to enhance those patterns in Zbrush, I couldn't import those maps into Zbrush at any one time or as one sequence. I would have to import one, and that would flood the entire thing. Then I would have to import another, and that would flood the entire thing. So, but you can export out. Zbrush supports UDIMs, just not for importing textures, and that's a real pain in the behind. Algoretti, or Algoretti, I can't see what that is, says Substance is really good for hand painting now since they added the Photoshop brush system. That is true. While that's better, it still doesn't really have it's not fast for color picking. Like in Photoshop or Mudbox or Zbrush, you can paint color pick, but in Painter, there are a lot of extra steps involved that. So it's just not as intuitive. You can technically get exactly the same result. There's just a significant amount of friction there as well. For a portfolio piece, is it better to pose and sculpt from scratch, then retopologize, then UV map and texture? Or is it necessary to make it in T-pose and then pose, UV and texture? I'm not sure if I entirely understand your question, but I'll try to answer that. The way I would do it for a portfolio piece, I wouldn't model in T-pose. I prefer A-poses because T-poses they really like mess up the shoulder or something. But that's a different discussion. So I would model in A-pose, then I would texture in A-pose, sculpt in A-pose, then I would pose the character afterwards, and then I would fix whatever deformation issues there are there. Then I would apply the same texture maps and just render that out. It's interesting talking so much in sculpting because I'm kind of just going autopilot here. I haven't really been looking at what I'm sculpting, and I'm like, dinosaur. Cool. I just looked up now for a second, and turns out, yeah, we now have a dinosaur, kinda. But this is what happens when it's autopilot. It looks like okay, but I haven't really put thought into any specific things because it's really hard to think and to talk and think and sculpt at the same time. Some people might be able to do it, but this is kind of like the best I can do at the same time. Yeah, Fiction is saying, I liked painting with layers in Substance. I never use Mudbox, but if they also have a layer system, that's great. Yeah, they do. Danny is asking with a $5 donation. Thank you. When submitting a demo reel, modeling demo reel, is it absolutely necessary to texture my models, even if texturing is not my strength? No. If you are, this is what I am actually comfortable answering because this is what I used to do. If you are applying PRL as a modeler, don't worry too much about texturing your characters. If you're really strong at that and you want to be a texture artist as well, that's a plus, I suppose. But a modeler is expected to model. Don't worry about texturing. Like if you have an amazing model but you have crappy textures, it's just going to bring the whole thing down. Find some kind of beautiful clay shaded render system for it, and then render your models like that. Make sure it's easy to see topology and all that, but don't worry at all about texturing. Keep the shaders dead simple. Keep it to clay shaders and don't worry about texturing at all. I hope that answers your question. Cheyenne is asking, sir, if this has been answered already, but will you open a mentorship program in the future? Yes, I will. Here is a link to it. You can sign up here for a mailing list, and we will send out an email whenever there are spots available for that. And you can find all the details on that page. So currently I have 2 mentees. So I'm mentor for two students right now. And the way it works is I'm giving them assignments once a week. And then I'm giving them a proper recorded feedback on that to make sure that their exact issues are being addressed. So I start off, it's pretty hardcore exercise. I believe one of them is doing it right now, where I'm asking them to do a 5-hour sculpt from scratch from a sphere. We have to do a realistic human, and that is a very, very, very tough exercise. But it's a good one. It's a really good one for evaluating your skill level. And then from there, I see what issues they're having with their sculpts. Like, I don't care so much what they tell me their issues are, because that might not really be their issue. If somebody is like, I'm struggling with the forearms, yeah, cool, but let me diagnose you here. So then I'll come in and I'll really just evaluate what their actual weaknesses are, and then we'll talk through it, and we'll talk through their goals, and then we develop an 8-week mentorship based on their exact needs, which is really fun. People are improving really fast once they get proper feedback. Hey, what are your thoughts on 3D tracing? I see some people doing sculpts, but they trace over the picture. To me, that's no different from 2D tracing. Yeah, I mean, good question. To some extent, you have to trace pictures. You just have to, because you are not good enough at evaluating things just based on your own artistic eye. It's hard to get likenesses. So you should be tracing things. That said, you also should understand the main volumes behind what you're doing as well. It needs to look good without you tracing something just because you're dealing with volume. But trace as much as you can. Use whatever resource you have available. 3D is hard enough as it is, so go crazy. The hard part is that even if you were to trace a character, like if you were to align have image planes of like 10 different views for a character, and you align it perfectly, all of them, still not gonna look good. Still gonna look kind of bad, because you need to understand the volume in 3D. So it's not a cheat, it's just like a sanity check. What are your thoughts on fiber mesh for grooming as an alternative to XGen? It's not really an alternative. XGen is a full grooming system, while fiber mesh is a way of, I suppose, getting guides out or doing like a rudimentary groom. They work pretty well together. You can do an initial groom with fiber mesh. You can export that to XGen, and you can use them together. But they're just different. They're just different things, really. So use them both. XGen though is tricky to use. I worked for the Intro to Maya series. I worked a fair bit of XGen just to make sure I really got that part of it right, and it's a pretty tricky thing. In theory, it's pretty simple, but it has a lot of issues. Like it has it has a lot of UX issues, but also just it's really buggy. So sometimes like the UX can be a bit weird. So you might mess something up because of that, but then you think you did everything correctly, and then yet it messes up, and you don't know if you messed something up or if it's just Xgen being weird. Will you review Maya 2022's new features? Maybe. Big maybe for that. Speaking of, we did do a video not too long ago. I don't think that might be new. Yeah, I think that's actually new in 2022. It's of sweep mesh for Maya. Sweep mesh is amazing. It's really good for working with curves and making interesting models with that. Like it's like the ultimate rope simulator, basically, or rope creation tool, essentially. Are there any alternatives to Xgen for Blender? I don't have a Maya anymore. Yeah, good question. If somebody knows that one, let me know. I don't think there is anything that's even remotely close to Xgen, to be perfectly honest, for Blender. I just don't think there is a hair system that has that power. Like, while I have a very love-hate relationship with Xgen, it is also really powerful. Stick to Houdini for grooming, especially if it's fur. That's sound advice. Houdini seems to be really a good tool for grooming. I know a lot of studios use Houdini for grooming, like just natively. Yeah, fiction here's an interesting one for you when it comes to grooming, where well, first, the way you would bring things back and forth between software would probably just be as pure curves. But like, how do studios deal with such a tedious task? It's just tedious. The way you groom something there is just a lot of work. There really isn't like I don't know about the Weta hair system. I heard that's decent, but grooming is just a tedious task. It's unfortunately just hair just sucks today. That's just my opinion on it. I don't think there are any good solutions on it. Let me just describe my dream solution for hair. Hair in the real world can be so much fun. People play with hair. People have fun hairstyle. You can pull, like if you have long hair, you can drag your hands through it and change it in a second. Go from one side of your face to another. You can do silly things with hair. You can just have fun with hair, and you can cut it so easily. Use all sorts of brushes and everything on it. And then in 3D, it's like you have to use these insanely old tools, and even to make it just look realistic is really tricky. So I'm kind of envisioning some kind of revolution in it, where like a proper GPU accelerated tool, like imagine Marvelous Designer but with hair, where you could just paint on where you want the hair follicles to go, and it would simulate the hair. You could have gravity on, gravity off. You can have a hairbrush. You can have just all sorts of interesting tools for it. I think that would be so much fun, because the problem with hair is that every living creature, most mammals would have hair to some extent. Like, even if it's just arm hair or eyelashes or anything like that, you just need hair. And doing that today in 3D is just a real pain. Like, if you ever tried to do a full like peach fuzz setup with eyebrows and eyelashes and hair on the head, like that is not a trivial thing to do. Like, both artistically it's tricky, but also just technically there's so many things that can go wrong. Yeah, Kyle Paxton, what you're saying is we need Marvelous Designer type software for hair. That's exactly what I'm saying, where you go back to the fundamentals of it. Like, I mean, the fundamentals of Marvelous is basically become a tailor. Fundamentals of hair should be become a hairdresser. You know, if you're a hairdresser today, I don't think it's going to help you a whole lot doing 3D, because it's so damn technical. So yeah, I would love to see that. I haven't seen anything like that, but that would have been my dream solution. Basically, sculpting making characters was a nightmare before Zbrush. Texturing was really tricky before Painter. Now we're in the before days for a hair system. It's just not fun. But the moment you were to have some kind of fun and interesting, so easy to use solution, like marvelous hair, you know, then that would revolutionize how we make hair. Yeah, it's interesting, like Hacks is saying here, Marvelous made cloth designing so much easier. It's like, Marvelous as a tool isn't particularly hard to use. What's hard is you have to become a tailor. You have to understand patterning, and that stuff is hard. But same with being a hairdresser, you know, it's not easy to become a hairdresser, but it should be easy to get to the point that you go straight to the fundamentals, where somebody who has a good understanding of hair and styling should be able to have an advantage in 3D and just jump straight into it. But today it's just a technical exercise, it seems. What do you think of MetaHuman? Amazing. It looks groundbreaking. It looks just like a really, really, really good system. I would like to apply. I would like to apply for a school, but worried that I would not have time to learn texturing properly. Would you advise to exclude that and send a character as is in the application? So you're making a portfolio to get into a 3D school. I mean, send in what you have. It sounds weird if you need a full character for a school. That's kind of the point of the school, right? That you should learn that throughout your education. Dr. Beard or Kian says something like that. Just want to take a moment to say that I really appreciate the Black Friday sales and the opportunity to get discounted courses. Thank you very much. And with that, I'll just jump into our store. And I just want to show you guys that for people who just joined, that our Black Friday sale is now live. You can also obviously see that on the bottom of the screen as well. Head to FlippedNormals.com and you can check out Intro to Sculpting, the 3D bundle for beginners, mega effects pack. We have all sorts of interesting things. This one just came out, which is also how to make hair for games in Blender. This is made by a very talented artist called Conrad Hecto, who is showing you how to make this in Blender using hair particles, which is super cool. I really enjoy this one. Just really goes through all of it, how to make, you know, speaking of hair. While I said that hair sucks, and I think it does, this is probably one of the better tutorials on how to actually wrestle with it today, on how to do the basics of it and how to do the fundamentals of it as well. You also have the beginner bundle as well, which contains all sorts of courses: Intro to Painter, Intro to Sculpting, Intro to Maya, Intro to Blender, Intro to Zbrush, and what is this course here? Intro to Substance Designer. So this is like, I legit think you get more information here than you would in at least one whole year of school, because there's so much content here. So yeah, if you're interested in this, I'll just leave a link to this in the chat. Same with creating hair for games. And then we'll go jump back to Zbrush. On topic of hair, is there an easy life hack for making feathers? No, there is no easy way of making feathers. You know, that's where you might be lucky if, when it comes to feathers, if you are, there might be some scripts or pre-made plugins or something available, but it's one of those, right, where can you make me a fully realistic dinosaur with all the scales? Cool, give me 2 weeks to do it. Can you give me a bird? I need a team of researchers, 6 months, and $1 million of funding. Like, it's there are some things that are kind of like solved in 3D. The same as like doing a dinosaur. This is not like a novel problem. This is just artistically hard. But imagine breaking, like having a loaf of bread and you tear it apart. That is also like giving me a SIGGRAPH paper and $6 million in 10 years of research. There are some things in 3D that is just like way, way, way harder than other things. So feathers, not a fun thing to do. It also depends how hard you want to be, or how realistic you want to be. Because I'm sure you could buy a ready-made feather pack. Like, you have the model and you have like hair cards and you have that. But if you want that to look fully realistic, that is pretty tricky. Do dinosaurs get ingrown scales? Yeah, this is where we kind of we're talking about this in the beginning. Dinosaurs, this guy here will probably just have feathers as well. I'm just freestyling here. I'm treating this not as a dinosaur. I'm treating this as basically a dragon, because that's kind of what we're dealing with when it comes to like Jurassic Park, Jurassic World, all that kind of stuff. They're not really dinosaurs. If they were, they would need the research team for feathers. Al Howell is asking, business question. How important has YouTube been in growing your business? If you could start again, what's the one thing you would do differently? Yeah, YouTube is important. It's really cool seeing how many people know about FlippedNormals just because of YouTube. So I think it would be very hard to do FlippedNormals in the marketplace without YouTube, to be honest. Just because it's a way that people can see kind of what our courses are about. If you like the videos we're doing, you can be reasonably sure that you're going to like the premium training we're doing as well. And also it's just a good way of reaching a lot of people, which is super cool. It's really cool to be able to hear from the community like that. What's the one thing you would do differently? Well, building a marketplace is hard. It's generally a hard thing to do. I'm not sure if I would do anything differently. I'm pretty happy where we are right now. Maybe more YouTube. Do more YouTube. It's YouTube is a lot of fun. Clyfer is saying, I think that's how you say it. I thought you could do feathers as hair. Yeah, you kind of can. It's just tricky. People have done feathers before, but it's just not a trivial problem. Feathers are quite hard. You might be able to make a feather and use some kind of hair system to scatter it around, but it's just not a simple problem. Yeah, David is asking a question. Can you give us advice on making portfolios? What was your mindset when making the first one, and how long did it take you to find your first 3D job? This is a really good question. This is something I've been talking about throughout the stream now. That is, when you make your portfolio, you're not just making a series of pretty pictures. You're making a job application. So the non-smart way of doing it, to put it like that, is I think it would be cool to include this project. And this is a project that is fun for me to do. It doesn't really matter if it's fun for you to do the project. You're making a job application. You're making a resume for studios to evaluate your skill set, seeing if your skill sets overlap with what they require. Do you have marketable skills? So do the opposite. Instead of asking the studios, hey, is this what you're looking for? You go, hey studio, what are you looking for? And then you build that. Build what the studios are looking for. And I don't just mean like blindly follow their advice. If they're not going to be extremely specific, oh, we're looking for this exact car. They might be that, yeah, we actually have a lot of movies coming up that will have robots in them, robots and spaceship. So if you were to have a lot of robots and spaceship in your portfolio, that would be really beneficial here. But yeah, you just have to talk to the studios. That was what I was doing when I got into Framestore. I asked around a lot, like not just, hey, what do you think of my portfolio, to hear nice things, but genuinely, what should I include? There was a big difference from when I asked people, hey, what do you think about this? And they were like, yeah, this is pretty cool, to, hey, specifically, what should I include in my portfolio? I'm looking to get a job as a modeler. Because then they were like, all right, gloves off, let's talk. So consult with professionals and keep your ego at bay. If they don't like something, you just have to accept that it's probably not good enough. If you're getting some harsh feedback, just know that the feedback is not about you. It's nothing to do with you as a person. It's about your work. If you're getting feedback, be thankful and just know that, cool, now my work can get better. What was that hair tutorial you suggested? That was the tutorial I'll link here now. This is using, this is for hair for games. I don't know how to pronounce this, but what do you think of Ornatrix? I think that's how I would say it. That looks like a good solution. I'm not intimately familiar with that, to be perfectly honest. It looks like a pretty decent solution, but I'm not well versed in. I don't, contrary to popular belief, I don't know every software on the planet. Though that would be pretty cool. Yeah, so like I think it's interesting, like the whole what was your mindset about making your first portfolio? The mindset is really I'm trying to show that I have marketable skill sets. Once you can do that, then everything becomes a lot easier, because then it's not a question of, oh, is this will they like what I'm doing? You're going like, what do you want to see, and you build exactly that. Have you tried any sculpting programs on the iPad? Yes, I have. I used Nomad a little bit. There's some museum here in Copenhagen called Overtake, which is fantastic. So I've been going there a bit with my girlfriend and just sculpting from life, actually. Just bringing her iPad and just been sculpting on that, which is really fun. Really enjoying that. Crazy powerful software. I think maybe in some years Nomad can rival Zbrush. That would be fantastic. The interface and the UX is so much more comfortable than dealing with Zbrush. But you know, who knows? Maybe that's not what they're even interested in. Is it possible to achieve this much detail of a sculpt in Blender? Yeah, you can do this level in Blender. You can definitely take it a little bit further as well. But if you really wanted to get to a high detail level, then you'll probably have to take it into Zbrush at some point. But yeah, I mean, Blender is getting more and more powerful. It's missing a lot of features though, like layers, for instance, and the sculpting brushes still aren't as good. But I mean, for sculpting, Blender has got pretty good. I believe we just made a course on that as well. I should know, but that's the thing. What happens when you make so many courses? Let's see here, newest products, because we made a sculpting course in Blender here. Introduction to, you guys might be interested in this. Introduction to Sculpting in Blender. It's a little bit mixed between like Intro to ZBrush and Intro to Sculpting, where we go through a lot of different concepts. First, like how do you sculpt in Blender, the technicals of that. But then second off, how do you approach sculpting? Like how do you think about sculpting? And we sculpt up this extremely creepy, realistic Suzanne at the end. But this is all sculpted in Blender. So you can take it quite far. Like it's pretty cool that you can take it this far directly in Blender. So it's pretty nice. But yeah, it's definitely missing some features as well. Like undo is also painfully slow. But it's also a lot easier to learn than ZBrush. ZBrush is not easy to learn for pure sculpting. Well, Blender really is, particularly if you already know how to use Blender. Now you just kind of switch to the sculpting tab and there are some new features there. It's a curse to learn all the 3D software. I've almost fallen into that trap. Yeah, that is very true. Learn the software. Like software are just tools. If you need a tool, learn the tool. If you don't need the tool, don't learn it. Just don't fall into the trap of being like, oh, Maya looks pretty good, I need to learn Maya. Oh, but Max looks pretty good, Blender looks good, or Houdini. And you're just going to be spending all your time just trying to learn the software. I've done that as well. That's why I have so much experience with so many different software. You know, how like I didn't really know how to use any of them, but I knew how to navigate in all of them. Software I have properly used, though, I've used a fair bit, but I've been doing 3D for a while. It would be like ZBrush, Mudbox, Modo, Blender, Maya, Softimage, did I say Max, Mari, Painter, Photoshop, Nuke, Fusion. You know, it's been a lot after a while. So sometimes I haven't used Modo in almost like 7 years, I think. And sometimes I still cross wires and I try to use a Modo hotkey when I'm using Blender or Max or Maya or something. It's really weird. And recently I used Max for the first time in like legit a decade, and I still remembered most of my hotkeys. It's absurd how the brain works like that. This is actually really funny on how YouTube's spam filter works. Rafael Hassel now said GIMP, which I suppose could be some kind of like slur or something, but I suppose it just means the open software called GIMP, which is a perfectly valid thing to say. Sometimes the YouTube algorithm is not fantastic. Are normal maps ever used in production on hero models, as in creatures, or only displacement maps? Yeah, normal maps are used occasionally. I think on Pirates of the Caribbean we used a lot of normal maps. Normal maps are really good for like, particularly for like instead of a bump map, because if you were to go like this crazy close up, you can technically displace it, but that becomes a little insane. So I really prefer using like normal maps I prefer using displacement maps for like the low and mid frequency, and then like normal maps for higher frequency. But the most correct thing would be to use of course displacement for everything, because that makes real geometry. It's just not really feasible, because you have to optimize it at some point, otherwise your computer will catch on fire. What software should be used for creating hand-painted tileable textures? That's a good question. You could use Substance Painter for that, or you can use Photoshop. In Photoshop, you use use the offset feature to create hand paint, or to create a tile textures. But you could also use Substance Painter for that as well. Substance Painter, they have there is a file which comes along with it for being able to create more tile textures, which is really cool. For general tileable stuff, Designer is pretty good, like Substance Designer or Adobe Substance Designer, whatever it's called now. But Painter or Photoshop would be my guess. Cheyenne is asking, is there a way to dynamesh just a particular section of your mesh, like a neck, if you're extruding it, and keep your rest low res? That's actually a great question. I'm not sure if I've tried that before. Let me try that. Let me try to dynamesh one part here. I'm sure I have tried this before, but no, it doesn't seem like you can actually do that. But what you can do, if you want to do a part of it here, you would use Sculptors Pro instead, where you can yes, and I have so many custom brushes now, so I keep getting confused. You can use Sculptors Pro for this, and then you can activate that, and you can paint directly with that instead. And where has Sculptors Pro hidden itself now? I should know this, since I have been teaching Zbrush. There we go. It's on a stroke. That's one of the problems with Zbrush. If there's a feature you haven't used for a little bit, you're like, where is this feature? It could be under Brush, Draw, Tool, Transform. It could be anywhere. But yeah, Sculptors Pro allows you to activate this, and now you can sculpt on a certain area now. So now you can like get more high res, or you can get more low res. So now you can see that this region here becomes crazy low res just because of Sculptors Pro. So that's pretty cool. You can even enable it for like the smooth brush. And now you can just see what's happening here. So if you need to locally change something like this, I wouldn't dynamesh it locally. I mean, you can split it off and do that. I would have used Sculptors Pro. If you want to dynamesh something though, you're saying you click of a button. The way you do that, you just control drag outside the model. Now you can see here that this changes a little bit. So if you are doing this, you can just do this. And there we go. Just control drag outside. It's how you clear a mask as well. Which is also, confusing. Why are feet so hard to sculpt? That's a great question. I think feet are hard to sculpt for the same reason hands are hard to sculpt. And I think it's because we severely underestimate how hard they are. Because it's like, you have the upper arm and you have the forearm, which are simplified down into little tubes. But hands are, basically a whole human figure. It's like you have a small human at the end of your arms, if that makes any sense. So we just kind of assume that you have a flat surface on your on your as a palm, and then you have like 5 little sausages popping out of that. But you don't. The hand is really hard to sculpt because it's really complicated to, like, it has a really complicated construction. Like you can deform your hand so much, like try to keep it entirely flat and it looks just, well, flat, and then try to make like a fist and it becomes way more rounded. And notice like almost like the length of your finger, if you look at it from the top versus if you flip your hand, the fingers look longer from when the palm down than when palm up. You know, like measure it. It's just tricky. Like visually, from the joint to the first joint to the end joint, it looks longer of palm up than palm down and palm up. So it's tricky because it's hard. And then you have feet, which are, you know, like simplified versions of hands, I suppose. So feet and hands are hard because they are complicated and we underestimate the complexity. We assume that you can just kind of throw some stuff out there instead of having to spend as much time on the hand as you do on like the torso. Yeah, here's a comment as well, like hands are really about the bones as well. Like it's true, like you don't really have muscles in the hand. Technically you do, but practically, like the way you move your fingers is all like in your forearm. So it becomes tricky as well. How much quantity is important for a portfolio for characters? What would be a good number at the end of a degree? Basically, how many characters should you have at the end of a portfolio there? I would say something like 4 characters is a good amount. And they should be different. Don't make the same character over and over again. If you have 1 knight, don't make 4 knights. And if you're making a knight, realize that that's really not a character. That a knight is basically a car. You know, it is a hard surface model. It's a train. If you can model a knight, you can model a train, but you can't necessarily model an orc or a horse. So find some variation. Maybe you should have 1 animal in there, like a proper animal study. You should have maybe an anatomical study or a figure study. Maybe you should have a realistic, fully realistic human, and maybe a digital, like an actual realistic portrait. Matching a specific human. You know, be very specific with the pieces you make, and they should show different things. But I would say that 4 characters should be plenty. 4 characters of high quality should be enough. If you have drastically more than that, like some people have like 10 characters at the end, that means that you're probably making too many, because now, you know, you're wasting your time. Instead of making 10 ones, just make 4 really good ones. Do you think ears are just a case of just do a twirl and looks good enough? No, I don't think ears are like that at all. Let me actually show you a thing here, because we have a product for this, which, you know, is a course I made on sculpting ears, sculpting facial features, really. Let's see here. Here we are, sculpting the facial features. Yeah, I just realized it's called sculpting facial features, and we're doing an ear. An ear is very much not a facial feature, but you know, if you look at this one here, here's the image I want to show you. I'll also just send you a link to this. I'll send you guys here. Like, the ear is very much not just a twirly thing. You know, it has the helix, which goes around here. You have the tragus. You have the anti-helix. It's pretty simple once you know this. You know, if you can simplify this into just like a few shapes, one thing going around, one thing going in the middle, and then it just has the swirl is always the same. It just has a different proportion basically. Ears can be quite different from person to person, but it is proportion that is really different. So the cool thing though is that once you understand this shape, then you kind of know how to do an ear. You know, we can sculpt a little ear for you guys right now, where it's not that hard once you actually know how to do it. You know, let's try to sculpt something here. But don't try to just do a swirly. You know, an ear is not just a swirly. It is a swirly. It's just a very specific swirly. So, you know, we have I just need some more resolution on this. You have the shape going all the way around here. So sculpt this in here. And it can be quite fast once you know generally what's going on. This is going to be the ugliest ear ever sculpted, I think. So we have this general shape going around it like so. This goes inwards. Keep in mind, in ears, you have a hole. It's not just a swirly shape. You have a hole going into, the actual brain so you can hear things, which is a pretty cool feature of ears, that you can hear things. Then you have the shape here. This goes something like this. And the shape is always generally the same. Once you understand the shape, then you can sculpt any ear. Then it's all the proportion that's different. A little lobe here. This is kind of chilling out down here. And obviously we go more in depth into this in the actual tutorial. Then we have the tragus here. So that's generally the shape of the ear. You need to shape this a little bit up. But yeah, that's generally what an ear is all about. Once you get the main shapes like this, then you can sculpt any ear. So yeah, learn these shapes, learn them by heart, and then you'll never have issues with ears ever again. Ears are one of those things, unlike hands and fingers, which are just fundamentally complicated. The ears have very specific shapes, and it's always the same thing. And you don't have bone in the ears, or you don't have anything fancy in the ears. It's just a shape. Can you work with several files in Zbrush? Yes, you can, if you're using tools. If you are working with file and project, then you can't really do that. I guess you can load it in, but the easiest way is just to load it in as a tool. Then you can load in a different tool here. I have, for instance, another one here, which is dude I sculpted like years ago. So here, you can load this guy in, and now I can have this guy here at the same time as I have the dinosaur, and you can keep going between these. If you save this as a tool, it will only save the currently available tool. If you save this as a project, file project, now it's going to save the whole thing here, which also makes it stupidly heavy, because you might have a model here which is like 10 million polygons, duplicate it a few times, and now your little sculpt here will contain all of those things. How are you creating imaginary characters with good looking anatomy? It's a really good question. You first get good at sculpting realistic things. Then you can start to stylize it. I mean, a monster is in many ways a combination of a realistic human with maybe a realistic animal, or just full-on realistic animal, or a full-on realistic human. So make sure you understand how to sculpt realistic humans or realistic animals. Then everything becomes so much easier. Do you know? Yeah, here was a question that disappeared again. If you could improve any feature of Blender, what would it be? It's not really so much a feature per se. I have a little wish list. I would say the UX, the user experience. I'm really not a big fan of the user experience. It feels like with 2.8, we're like halfway there compared to earlier versions, but I really think they need to unify a lot of things still. It's still a little hard to work with a lot of different things there. So I would say improved user experience. Then, like specific features, the UV tools would need a serious revamp. The UV tools are not from, I mean, they feel like they're actually from like a third decade ago. They feel like they're from the first decade of the 2000s, and now we're in the third decade. They kind of have to be upgraded. And then the retopology tools are adequate, but not great. But obviously those are the tools I'm using. But if it had an improved user experience, that would help me so much. It would just be so much more comfortable. There are a lot of like small little paper cuts, I like to call them, like simple things that you're not gonna die from a paper cut, but if you have 200 of them, it's gonna make your life pretty uncomfortable. So quality of life would be very, very much improved, or like to be improved in Blender. I'm sure it's gonna get there. Kishore is saying, I'm a beginner, so I don't have that much money to spend on courses. I mean, luckily, we have 50% off now, so hopefully that helps a little bit. But if not, you know, we have a lot of videos on our YouTube channel. So I think we have like 300 and something videos now on our channel. So, you know, if you can't afford courses, there is a lot of content here. And also we have a really nice Discord community as well that is more willing to help a lot of people as well. If you have specific questions or needs. And then, you know, if you require courses in the future, you can always get them from FlippedNormals. How long are you having the discount? I'm not entirely sure. I think it's the end or early December. Yeah, Puke is saying, yeah, the bounding box algorithm they use for packing UVs just seems outdated. I suppose you're talking about the Blender UV tools here. Yeah, it's not just like that either. It's also like the sync view selection. It's like everything should just be visible at, like if you have UVs, the UVs should just be visible in the UV editor. You shouldn't have to select them. And then you have to enable sync view, and that messes up a ton of different things. So they just have to basically look at something like Rism or Maya and just be like, this is a solved workflow. Like the UV workflow in Maya is great. You know, if you can just port that, like it's a solved problem like that. Can you send a Discord link? Yes, I can. I'm sure people on Discord are gonna be like, why are there so many new people here? Let's see. I've copied the Discord link and I'll now send a Discord link. Have you seen the new human course by CG Cookie? It looks really good. Yeah, it looks fantastic. That I mean, fantastic job by the guys at CG Cookie and the author as well. It just looks like a great course. How to fast switch between front, top, side view like the Blender Pie menu. I suppose you're talking about Zbrush here. You can just hold down the Shift key, and that just snaps it. Or you can do a little cheat, which is you just go up here and just kind of press around here. But yeah, I don't really use this guy. I use him for to visually see my orientation. But I'm just kind of snapping by holding on the Shift key. So pretty handy. And again, it's really hard to sculpt all this while I'm talking. So I was hoping to do something like something pretty nice, like with teeth, you know, and eyes. But even just like making teeth is pretty tricky when I'm talking. So, but let's try to do that. The way I'm making teeth is first make one tooth and then duplicate that tooth around. So I'm usually just doing this with symmetry on. As you can see here, here's a few little tips. 2 tips. First one is symmetry is based on the subtool. So here you can see symmetry is off. Well, here symmetry is on. So symmetry is based on the subtool. That is amazing and horrible. It's horrible if you forget it and now you've sculpted on a subtool for a long time without symmetry. But it's awesome if you know it. And then second off, you can just go between the different subtools just by alt-clicking on them. You don't have to use this at all. You can also hit the... I might remove that. I think it was the N key before. Yeah, you could hit the N key and you can just have a list of it, but that seems to be removed now. So yeah, just alt-clicking on the one you want. So it's really useful. So you don't have to click on these at all. Then I'm gonna be just scaling this guy down. I find clothes pretty hard to do. Any tips? Yeah, clothes are hard to do. Tip is use Marvelous Designer, to be honest. Marvelous Designer is fantastic for clothes. If you're trying to sculpt clothes, that is really tricky. Then you need a lot of reference. So try to get into Marvelous Designer and you know, become the tailor you always wanted to do. Amir says, I watched a lot of your videos on YouTube. I really appreciate it. Big fan. Thank you so much. I appreciate that. Kitten is saying, how do you stay motivated to sculpt stuff all the time? I usually attempt something one day and then put it off for a week before coming back. Yeah, that's a tricky one, right? Motivation is always like a big topic. Like if you're interested, we have a whole video on how to stay motivated as an artist, which you can find by just searching on channel. It's on YouTube, so completely free. My position on motivation is that motivation doesn't really work. If you have to motivate yourself to do something, that's tricky. I found the motivation comes after having started to do something. Like you don't feel motivated to go to the gym, and then you go to the gym. You go to the gym, and now you feel motivated to continue going to the gym. So how do you start that? You just need determination. If you don't feel like sculpting, obviously you need to consider your health and mental health and all that. But at some point you just have to get started and go like, I'm gonna sculpt for an hour today, not more, not less, just an hour. Or maybe you can be like 20 minutes. I'm just gonna sculpt for 20 minutes just to establish a routine, and then you can take it from there. But for me, it's not about motivation. It's just about being determined. About like before when I went to the gym, before COVID times, it was like, I'm going to the gym, I'm waking up, and I'm just going. If I was tired or it was, bad weather outside, it didn't matter. You're just going to the gym. It's a non-negotiable thing. So it's kind of like you remove motivation from the equation in that sense, which is obviously a lot easier said than done. But honestly, that's what helps for me. It is just straight up, just do it. And then, don't start with like 8 hours a day. Start with something more, like something, which is actually achievable. But just do it. Just get started, and motivation will follow from that. Do you know of a good rigging course in Blender? Oh boy, do I know a good rigging course in Blender. We have one by Pierrick, which is fantastic. Let's see here. Actually, there are 2 really good rigging courses in Blender, which I know of. Let's see here. We have effective rigging in Blender, and then we have Rigify. So that's how you spell it. There we go. This one is really good. This shows you how to rig a full character like this. Really, really good. And then you have to use Rigify to rig stuff in Blender as well. So this one is super cool as well. You basically how do you rig anything using Rigify. Rigify is a really cool plugin. So I highly recommend both the effective art of rigging in Blender and how to rigify as well. Also, Pierrick has a fantastic course you guys might enjoy. It's about animation in Blender. There we go. This one here. It's called Alive, and it's all about how to animate in Blender. And Pierrick is a fantastic artist, and just goes through all sorts of cool stuff. So you guys might be interested in this one. All right, cool. Back to Zbrush. I'll now try to do a tooth. A little tip as well. Now what I'm going to do, I'm going to make one tooth, and then I'm going to duplicate the crap out of it. A better tip is to make one tooth and or use that for everything. But I haven't done it before. Well, I haven't done that. I don't have a modular tooth. So I'm just going to be sculpting up a little bit. So instead of duplicating the tooth the way it is now, I'm just going to sculpt it up a little bit, and then I'll duplicate it. If you were to do this for something more serious than this, I would also retopologize and UV map it and then duplicate it around. It's going to make it a lot easier. Yeah, Kitten is saying that Pierrick is an absolute mad lad. Yeah, on the mad scale here for lads, Pierrick is pretty high up on the mad lad scale. Yeah, Alive is the best animation course for Blender, hands down. Definitely course. Yeah, it is. It's it's really, really good. Yeah, the response to Alive has been fantastic. I mean, all of Pierrick's courses are just must-haves if you're interested in Blender. And he's such a nice guy too, which I always appreciate. Yeah, so now you can see the tooth is becoming a bit more refined. We can duplicate it, subdivide it as well. And then what I like to do is I like to mess it up a little bit up here where it meets the gums. This goes a little rougher here. There might be some gum disease or something like that here. And then keep that a little bit simple because we're going to duplicate it around. But and then it's much smoother down here. Just because this is where you would be. It's like it's been sandpapered down here because of all the eating. Any beginner modeling courses you recommend? It's a little annoying because I'm actually working right now for introduction to modeling in Maya. It's fully recorded and everything. We just haven't had time to release it yet. We don't really have a lot of good beginner courses at the moment, unfortunately, as far as I know. So now hold on a control key, and then you have to delete a level before. You have to delete the subdivision level for this. Then we just go to geometry, and then we just do delete lower, and there we go. Now we can just hit the control key and we can just duplicate this guy around like so. It's really cool with the new gizmo they added. I mean, new, they probably did it like 3 years ago, but when you're using it for like 15 years, Dynamesh even seems like a new feature. I'm like, ooh, they added Dynamesh. Yeah, in 2010, 2011. When they added Dynamesh, Morten messaged me. This was just after I met in 2011. And he was like, Dynamesh is the best thing invented since space. And I was like, yeah, that's a, that's a fair assumption. That's a fair point. Could you show the whole of what you're making? Yes, I can. I am trying to make a little dinosaur dragon thing here, who is just now getting some little teeth. Here's a little design tip as well, which I'm failing at right now. It's the teeth are uniformly spaced out. So you can see here, this is the same, they all have the same distance between each other, which is terrible. You don't want to do that. This is what happens though, because we're humans and we tend to like things evenly spaced out. But if you want something to look interesting, you really want things to not just feel evenly spaced out. Also now when I'm duplicating this around, I'm also trying to make sure that I'm going to be mirroring this over. So I'm trying to make sure that it doesn't cross the center line here, because then it's just going to look nasty. It's going to merge the model. So what I'm thinking about now when I'm doing this, a little tip as well, if you use auto groups, which you can find under tool, polygroups, and then auto groups, each one of these guys is now going to get a different color. And now you can just control click on it to select it. Control click with the gizmo active. So now if you want another tooth like here, I just control click it and then control drag to move it around like so. Here's a question. Hey, if you sculpt high quality details and you go to paint in something like Substance Painter, how would you make painting easier? Like if you sculpt lots of scars that are raised. Yeah, what makes it a lot easier is texturing becomes significantly easier the better your model is. So first make sure that your model is solid. Good UVs, good topology, all that makes it much easier. But also like the further you take your model in Zbrush as well, the easier it's also going to become, because then you can extract ambient occlusion maps and all of that kind of stuff. Ambient occlusion, cavities, curvature maps. And now this just means it's much, much easier. What I also recommend is painting, starting off. I'm actually working on a texturing course right now, which is going to be really cool once I finish it at some point. Starting off by creating masks, like smart masks, where you make one mask for the eye, one for the wet line of the mouth, one for the nose, all that kind of stuff, because you're going to keep using these maps for all sorts of stuff. You might be using them for tileable textures and masking stuff out there. So it's much, much, much easier if you make some nice masks before you properly start. Also, where do you get maps from? Like AO curvature, you can bake them directly in Painter. Like those maps are generated from the mesh itself. You don't like import them or anything like because you can bake them in any software. But like the way you get those maps is you simply just generate them from the mesh. That's why it's such a good idea to have a really good mesh beforehand, because the better your mesh is, the better those maps are going to be. Yeah, so you can get them from Zbrush, but Painter is much better. Also, I know a lot of people who use Marmoset, and they prefer that for baking. When you say smart masks, do you mean like a polygroup? No, I mean like actually creating a smart mask in Painter. Like you make a fill layer, you make a mask on that, you paint a specific mask, and then you like right click and hit save as smart mask. because that means you can keep reusing this mask over and over again. That was one of the things I learned in VFX, how much easier it is to paint something once you have proper masks. Like, it's so much faster to paint something if you have masks for everything. Now, boom, mirror and weld. This is something I have in the interface. You can't really see it because it's under the little Black Friday banner. But mirror and weld always works from the left side to the right side, meaning from the front view, screen left to screen right. And that is why I'm always so religious about keeping this in the same orientation. Because this now means mirror and weld, which you can find under geometry, modified topology, and then mirror and weld should be right here somewhere. There we go. Now we have this guy here, and then we can do a similar one. We can do mirror and weld, but we can do it on the y-axis. And that didn't work because it mirrored in the middle. So what we can then do instead is we can duplicate this. Just gonna save this guy. Every time you hear the ding, that's me saving. So now it's been mirrored. Oh, it's been duplicated, and then I can do mirror, and I can do on the y-axis, which you can find under deformation, and then mirror, and just set this to y instead. I have it in the interface, which again is hidden conveniently under the little banner. And then what we'll do is we are just going to start placing these guys now. You can, if the rotation goes a bit off, you can always just alt-click on the rotation here, and then on the gizmo. That's going to move it into spot. Oh, and now we need to enable symmetry, because if we move something closer together, we want it to actually be closer together. I prefer to have the same number of teeth in top and the bottom of the jaw, just because they can interlock a little bit better, but that's also entirely optional. Also, I won't really be looking at the questions while I'm doing this, because I have to concentrate a little bit, because otherwise this guy here will never have teeth. So if you see that in like a minute or so when I'm back to the questions, if you see that I missed your question, just ask it again. Honestly, that's fine, because I would hate to miss some cool questions. So yeah, the way I would do this if I was doing this for a more serious project is I would have modeled the tooth properly beforehand, like with topology and like with proper topology, not just sculpting from a sphere. And then I would have made the UVs as well for it. Makes it just a lot easier. Because now, you know, if I want to texture this thing, that becomes a bit of a nightmare. Because now I have to duplicate them, or I have to like retopologize and duplicate around and extract maps and all that kind of stuff. And there is at least one tooth too many here, and there are two ways we can fix that. Either we can just kind of hide it inside of it, or we can just hide the mesh like this, and then I can just use my magical hidden thing here called delete hidden, and there we go. We have now deleted this guy. So cool. So now we can start to just move these a little bit to the side, and I'm trying to cluster them. I'm trying to have an area where it's a little bit annoying. Something's going on with the rotation here, where I'm just trying to not make them evenly spaced, but have like some 2 here, spacing, 3 here, spacing, and then 3 there. So now you can see this looks much more interesting right away. What you can also do to make it more interesting, you can give this guy a little tongue as well, making like it's really easy to forget that, you know, characters would have tongues. So we can just give him a little bit of a sphere here. And then we can just scale this up a little bit. And then we can enable symmetry. Remember that. And we can just use the move brush. And we can just move this guy out like so. And now this guy has a little bit of a tongue. This doesn't have to be crazy refined. We can always, you know, refine this later. And now we can just hit Dynamesh, and there we go. And now I can look at questions again, because now I was able to concentrate a little bit, and I can refine this without too much trouble, I think. Let's just make this a little bit higher poly count. And now I'm going to save it, and you're going to hear a ding. And now let's look at some questions. June is saying, been watching your tuts since 2018, now making money with 3D, so thank you. Well, thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate that, and good job on that. That's really cool. Yeah, Sasha is saying baking the polygroups as an ID mask in Substance Painter is a big help. Yeah, this is what I'm going to be teaching in the texturing course as well. That you can make the groups in Zbrush already, like with polygroups, or you can like use polypainting, and then you can turn that into ID masks in Painter, and then you can, or just color pick that directly, or you can use this as a starting point for your smart masks, which you can refine further. When are you starting on a sculpting course for beginners? Well, I already have a lot of sculpting courses for beginners. Here's one which contains a lot of different sculpting courses. Let me send this to you right here. So we also have this one, which is, let's see here. Introduction to Sculpting. I know I've been talking about this throughout the stream here now, but there are new people coming. So this is a really solid sculpting course. Well, I mean, I'm biased. I made it, so take that for what it is. But read the reviews if you're interested. This is for basically all skill levels. We also have introduction to Zbrush as well, which I believe I listed down here. There we go. Can you export Nanite from Zbrush to Unreal? No idea. Honestly, no idea how that's working. Looks like a very interesting. I mean, I'm sure you can. I'm sure it's just like OBJ or something, but I have no idea how that'll work. What brushes do you use to detail in Blender? I think I'm pretty sure I'm just using the draw brush for that. Keeping it simple. We have a video on YouTube as well, which came out not too long ago. I think some months ago now, on sculpting in Blender. So you can find that on our channel if you just go to our channel. I suppose you should be on YouTube watching this. So go to our channel and just look back a few months, I think to like May, and you should find it. Kitten is saying, I have a lecturer which religiously uses Photoshop for most of the texturing, and it's really annoying. The last game he worked on was for a PS2 and his techniques feels really out of date. Yeah, sometimes, we have some small rants about teachers. And Paul, if you're still watching, you're great. But a lot of teachers are really out of date. There are some teachers who keep up to date on all techniques, which is fantastic. But a lot of teachers, unfortunately, they worked on a PS2 game, and that's when they last watched a tutorial, which is infuriating. I mean, I think it's so insanely disrespectful to not keep up to date. I mean, you're teaching people the wrong things. If you are teaching people to texture in Photoshop today as a teacher, and that's the main tool, like you're committing war crimes in CG. You should go to you're breaking the Geneva Convention of CG education. Like it's not what you do. It's wrong. It's wrong on so many levels. I mean, it's ethically wrong because you're teaching students actually the wrong thing, but it's also just not effective. So you're depriving students who are most likely paying a lot of money a good education. So the short way of saying that is if you're teaching texturing today, you're teaching either Mari or Painter, ideally Painter, but with a little bit of mix in Mari as well, depending a little bit what you're going for. But please, for the love of God, do not use Photoshop for texturing in 2021. That is insane. I mean, if you do personal art, whatever, who cares? But if you're doing it as a teacher, that is insane. Sorry, that was my little rant. Who would you recommend the switching to Blender course to? I've already some experience with Blender, but I'm not entirely confident yet. Would I learn something new? Yeah, we can look at this course. This is a pretty interesting course. I mean, again, I made it, so I'm a little biased about it. But here's a course we made. Putting this in the chat now. I guess since there's a delay, it looks like I'm just spamming the chat. But this is a course made for people who already know a 3D software and they have no interest in going through basic tutorials. They just want to get started with Blender. They're like, hey, I know what the tools are. Just show me where the buttons are. And that's what I'm doing here. So this is a good course if you want to switch to Blender, where we go through the sculpting, we go through how to set up UDIMs, and I'm treating you more like a professional, where like the intro to Blender is more, it's more like we assume that you don't know a whole lot about it. So if you're like lukewarm with Blender, then I still recommend this course. And we have a whole project here where we go through this entire thing, how to make this axe from scratch, you know, proper topology and all these kind of things. So I still think you're going to get a lot out of it. Yeah, this was kind of like in the ethos of what we like to do is, this is an issue we've been having ourselves. Let's make a course around that. Learning Blender, if you already know 3D, is honestly quite painful, because so many of the tutorials which exist, they're so basic. They're like, all right, so this is how we download Blender. This is a polygon. And you know, look, I've been doing 3D since like 9/11. I don't need to know what a vertex is. Just show me where the buttons are. Show me where hotkeys are. And that's exactly what we're doing here. In this as well, I do believe I'm using some Photoshop for texturing, but shh, that's okay. That's just purely for some simple stuff here to keep it simple. Have you ever worked on a variety of pipelines, or has every project you worked on had the same pipeline? Yeah, I mean, in production, the pipeline for within studios are all the same for different projects. Like if you're working on MPC, you are going to be working in the MPC pipeline for every single project. But then you go to Framestore and they have an entirely different pipeline, and you go to DNAG again, they have an entirely different pipeline again. So yeah, I mean, I worked on a lot of different pipelines, which is you know, really interesting. It's every pipeline is quite different, has strengths and weaknesses. You also realize that a lot of pipelines out there, they're not built because it's the best thing. It's more like it contains a lot of legacy, and switching the pipeline around is very, very expensive. Yeah, Wine Dave Mod says, feels incredibly backwards getting taught to texture in Photoshop when Mari and Painter exists, even if it's only to teach us the versatility of their versatility. Yeah, that's often what I hear, right? Like, oh, but it's good to know how it was done in the past. It's not, though. It's not good, because you have a finite amount of time when you're studying anything, or if you're studying 3D, you have so much to go through, and learning legacy tools is not useful. It would be like, all right, cool, it's all rendering. We're going to be sticking with mental ray because that's how it was done. Yeah, but it's obsolete. It's obsolete technology. We don't use that stuff anymore. There's nothing to gain from that. So yeah, like I really think it's insane to teach out of date techniques just because, yeah, this is how it used to be. Yeah, cool, but what is it now? And overstimulation is a real problem. Getting too much information is a very, very real problem for students. Like, students are learning so much at the same time, and you just can't get it all inside your brain. Like, you just can't learn 20 things at the same time. So what I prefer to do is, here's one thing. From this course, there's like one thing you should really, really pay attention to. And if we're doing texturing, it would be like, you should understand the basics of Painter and the basics of material theory. And if we try to pollute that with other things, you're not going to get anything from the course. Yeah, when you learn cooking, you don't learn how to make fire with 2 sticks either. Yeah, exactly. Like you learn the most current techniques. CR3D is asking, already have skills in illustration and modeling. Will this give me an advantage when picking up sculpting? It really should. The thing with sculpting is it's like a truly like a skill where your fundamental understanding of design is going to help so much. If you have a traditional sculptor or somebody who knows figure drawing like truly well, pick up Zbrush, they are just going to destroy the competition. It's actually a bit scary. I've seen this a few times. You have traditional sculptors picking up Zbrush, and they're just smoking me. Like, it is not even a competition. So if you have a good eye for design, if you have a good understanding of illustration and like drawing or 3D modeling, that's going to help a lot in sculpting. Yeah, here's an interesting point by IceWolf055. In my few years' experience, texturing, retouching with Photoshop is very essential in games, especially stylized games. You know, that's absolutely fair. There's definitely a use case for Photoshop. So I'm all for if you're learning texturing, you should learn minimum Painter and you should learn Photoshop. But you shouldn't be basing your workflow on Painter, or sorry, in Photoshop. It would be like, you should show the general workflow, and then you should can supplement and be like, yeah, in these cases here, it makes a lot of sense to use Photoshop. But you should go from general to specific. The general workflow is you start off with Painter, and then you can use Photoshop to grade some things here and there. And here are the exceptions. Have you entertained the idea of creating a likeness study course? Another are increasing amounts of that stuff online already, but I can't help fantasize how you'll go about it. Yeah, that'd be a good fun one. Problem with likeness studies is you have to be pretty specialized already at that kind of stuff. My thing is mostly like monsters and this kind of stuff, which I enjoy. I know Morten enjoys sculpting more humans, but right now we don't really have plans for a likeness course, though that would be a really, really fun one to do. And we just have so much we want to do, and there's such limited time, unfortunately. How will it go if I make concept art tutorials and improve my subscribers' art? I don't think I understand that question. Sorry. Can you elaborate on that? Hey Henning, do you guys have a course with the new features in Zbrush? We don't have anything for 2022. That just came out. So sorry, we don't have that right now. If you're interested in learning that, there's probably a lot of Michael Pavlovic stuff available, and he's really good at features. But yeah, nothing for that right now. Yeah, CR3D says Photoshop is obviously something you need to know. I fixed normal maps, ooh, not naughty, but okay. And AO maps post baking, but yeah, Painter is what you should be using. Yeah, exactly. Like the way I see Photoshop is like a Swiss Army knife. You can do all sorts of cool stuff with it, but like if you're fixing ambient occlusion or normal maps, that should be fixed in 3D, right? So now you're kind of doing like a little bit of a hacky thing. But sometimes a hacky thing is a good thing to do. You should know how to do that. What would you say is the most important thing when starting a character for games? Also, any tips or doing UVs and UDIMs? Well, I'm not a games artist, so I want to be a little careful here. It's really important that I'm not talking too much about what I don't know about. Assumptions, though, figure out, like in film as well, really like kind of like industry agnostic. Figure out what the character is going to be used for. Figure out what your budget for it is, like how much time you have for it. Figure out how far away it's going to be. And figure out, like in games, you would obviously need some like technical breakdowns or like technical limitations, like try count and map resolution, all those kind of things. But I'm not too comfortable answering specific questions about games. But I can answer it in like the general. That's fine. For making UDIMs, that's an interesting one. Like I prefer to think of my UDIMs as like selection sets. So if I select UDIM 1002, maybe that should be where the hand is, and it only contains the hand. If I select the UDIM like 1005, that's where the head is. And I use it as selection sets. I mean, in a very real sense, I use them as selection sets in Mari, because the selection tools there is a large part based around UDIMs. So that really, really helps to be organized with that. It also makes it a lot easier if you have to split up your model in Zbrush as well. You can split it up based on the UDIMs. It just simplifies it a lot. Also with UDIMs, just think about how many UDIMs you want. You know, figure out texture resolution and then build UDIMs around that. It's really easy that you go absolutely bananas with UDIMs, and you have like 300 UDIMs for a character that's not going to be seen that close up. For instance, if a character would be to be seen this close up, like I'm currently this close up, that will require a lot of UDIMs. If it's seen like this, that would not require a lot of UDIMs. So, you know, figure out exactly what the character is going to be used for and build it according to that. This stream will be uploaded as a video on your YouTube channel later. I believe it's just gonna kind of pop up by itself, actually. I don't think I have to do too much, but yeah, I think it should be available afterwards. The streams are usually available there. And then we get some complaints from YouTube because there's some background music. Yeah, White is saying, I watched Zbrush Summit with id Software, guests from Doom Eternal. They did all the hard surface in Zbrush. What do you think? What software to use for environments? Yeah, it's interesting with Zbrush for that, because you can actually tell just based on if you're playing the game, you can tell that this is designed in Zbrush, because the designs kind of changed for like the suits and all that the moment you started using Zbrush, because it feels like nice and organic at the same time as it feels like hard surfacey. So I mean, it's fantastic for that kind of stuff. Let me see if I can find some hard surface courses as well. We don't really have any for those from FlippedNormals directly, but obviously we have from creators. What do you think they use for environments for Doom? I mean, really anything. You can use any software for that. Let me find some of these courses. We also have some really nice hard surface courses from Simon Fuchs as well. Let me actually find some of my favorite hard surface courses. Yeah, Chamfer Zone. Here we are. This guy here, he has fantastic courses. We have Simon Fuchs and Chamfer Zone. These guys here are like amazing courses, and these are all 50% off. Like with, let me find my favorites here. You have with the Simon Fuchs, you have the gun, which he shows the entire thing. I think it's like 50 hours long. Yeah, exactly 50 hours long. And then the good old classic military radio. And I know I'm spamming links here now, but that's something you guys will have to deal with. And then we have the revolver as well. I'm a big fan of this one. But yeah, none of these are using Zbrush though. Martin is asking, how do you avoid seams from splitting a UDIM model in Zbrush? Painfully. Very painfully. It's splitting seams, splitting stuff in is just annoying. The way we were doing in DNAG is we would have like one piece. Let's say this was one UDIM and this was another UDIM. We would have like we would split it out. You know, obviously once the whole thing was done, we would split the whole thing out like into separate subtools. You know, based on UDIMs. You have to base it on UDIMs because otherwise you have no way of backtracking it. So you're clever about where your UDIMs are. So like maybe you have like a seam that kind of goes like this based on topology. And then everything here is one UDIM. And then everything here is another UDIM. And then you split it out. Like you do like a polygroup for it, then you do split and then do group split. And now you split it into the separate pieces based on that. And then oh no, I just dynameshed. And then what you do is you have a strip in the middle here, which you make you can do this in like Maya or something, and then project from either side. So if you need to sculpt across the UDIMs here, you take this strip and you sculpt on this side, you project it on the strip, you sculpt on, and then you project it from the strip back onto the other piece. It is a pain in the ass. Honestly, it's just really painful to do that. The thing is, it works okay, but it's a one-way street. The problem is, of course, the moment you want to change something. Then you are in big trouble, young man. Then you are in big trouble. So, because then you can't really like you can't just change that, you can't just update it, because now you've been splitting it out into a million different pieces. At least there is some hope, because you hopefully based it off the UDIM selection set. And that becomes very painful if something like a UDIM is here and then a UDIM is like down here. So that's why I was talking about before. If you're dealing with UDIMs, when you're making UDIMs, you want it to be like geographic in one area. You want like the top part here to be one UDIM. You want the bottom part here to be one UDIM. So if you were to split it out, it just becomes a million times easier to deal with. Yeah, so yeah, Martin, that's an annoying ass workflow. It's very, very painful. There aren't really any good ways of dealing with that. There are different ways of dealing with that, but there are no good ways. The best way is to just don't do it and do all the detailing in Mari instead. Just like amp up the different UDIMs you have and just amp up the texture resolution and just go from there, because it does become very, very painful. Yeah, so here's a good question by Kitten. What is the use of UDIM anyway? Okay, so imagine that this is like one texture map. The entire thing you're seeing now is one texture map, and it's a 2K map. And you're like, cool, that holds up really well. And now you're like, but what if I want to look here? And you're like, sweet, 4K map. And well, now Kitten, what if you want to be this up close? 8K map, 16K map, 64K map, 200. Like, you reach a point where you just can't keep adding more. You can't just keep amping up the resolution, because that is insane, right? At this close up, you wouldn't be able to do that. Plus, it's really heavy on the system to have these insanely big maps. Like, it's much easier in the system to deal with like a bunch of 4K maps than like a giant ass 32-bit map or 32K map. So what you're doing then is, instead of it being one texture map, which is like 200,000 pixels, you go, this area is a 4K map. This area is a 4K map. This area here is a 4K map. This area here is a 4K. This is a 4K. Because now you split it into different texture maps, and now you can just have a lot more resolution in it. Which is really cool. It also means that, if these are all 4K maps, let's say you want this here to be 4K, you have a whole body and that's 4K. Because you have shots like this, right? Where the face is a lot more high res than the body. So now you can say all the maps on the head are 8K and the maps on the body are 2K or 4K. Maybe you see only the head. This is all 4K, but the fingers are like 1K. So you can be much more dynamic with that. So that is like it's a long way of saying that UDIMs is a system which allows you to have to reach a lot more resolutions on your model, and it's absolutely essential on a character. Like imagine if you had a shot like this which just did this, right? And you need to go this, like for Smog, for the Hobbit, you just wouldn't be able to do that. How do you create UDIMs in Zbrush? Yeah, you don't do it in Zbrush. You do it in a software where you UV map it, where you start off with just doing the UV. We have done a bunch of tutorials on this. Just search for UDIM FlippedNormals. You do your UV layout like normal, then you split it into separate shells, and then you just place them around the layout, like the UDIM layout. Then you bring that model into Zbrush, and boom, you have UDIMs. Problem is, you can't display them in Zbrush, because if you then go to we don't have it here, but if you go to tool UV map and you do like morph UVs, they're just going to be on top of each other. But if you go to C plugin and multimap exporter and you try to export this out, that's going to export your UDIMs. So Zbrush has like kind of support for it. It's pretty painful. Donnie is saying, "Hi, is this the first day of the stream?" Yes, we started this a few hours ago. Streaming for quite a few hours now. Not sure how long we've been going now. We've been going for 4 hours or so? It's been quite some time. Should probably stop this. Should probably have some food at some point. Yeah, Danny's saying, I remember you guys did a half Bullman, a half dude last year. Yeah, that was the Minotaur. That was because I was playing Hades so much, which played the game so many times that I got inspired by that. Yeah, Mystery Affinery is saying, I make my UDIMs in Blender. Yeah, that's a good way of doing it. CR3D is saying, how do you feel about the Zero Measure feature? Zero Measure is fantastic. We have a bunch of tutorials dedicated to that as well on our channel, like what's best manual or auto topology. So you can definitely search for that on our YouTube channel. The too long that didn't watch, I suppose, is Zero Measure produces really cool and really fast topology, which works in a lot of cases. But if you want full control over your characters, if you need full deformation, you can't do that. You can't just auto UV map something. So if you were to do something like this for production, you would just shoot yourself in the foot if you did auto topology. You really, really, really want to do this by hand. Emmanuel is asking, what's a good poly count for high-res sculpt for baking? Honestly, like that's a bit like, it's a good question, but the answer is more like, how heavy is a stone? Well, depends. It depends just on, you shouldn't look at it at a poly count limit. You should look at it from a, does it have all the details you need? Currently, this guy here is nowhere near. It's at 2 million polys, but it's not nearly there when it comes to the resolution. You know, this is pixelated as hell. So I would need, at least for this guy here, at least like 20 million polys before I would even consider any kind of high-res baking. You know, the eye is even pixelated. Any plans to add the ability to follow tutorial creators or favorite them on your store? I believe you can already do that. You can follow them. Aha, we might have removed that feature. Wait, I'm not logged in yet. So yeah, I'm not logged in, but you can follow them here, and then you get an email whenever they post something new. And if you logged in as well, we also have like a heart feature as well, which allows you to put it in your wish list. Tua is asking, have you ever done a professional or personal project in game engine? No, I haven't really touched game engines. I've looked at game engines. I'm aware of game engines from like a periphery, but I've never used a game engine. You know, I was always in film, and I have no training in it, which is also why I'm reluctant to talk too much about the game development workflow. Though of course there was a significant overlap between anything else. The way I see game dev is basically it's like everything else, just optimized. How would you read topology as eyelids for a character with hooded eyelids? Yeah, good question. If you had a character like this who had hooded eyelids, I would have really like just done the topology for it. Like if the eyelids here were like going all the way, you know, down like this, I would have still modeled it the way it is in real life, where you actually, you know, it's not merged together. I would have retopology. I would have hidden parts of the eyelid when I was retopologizing it, and then just retopologize it so that it went. Let me show you with like I'll draw on top of it. I would have done it so the topology goes like this, tick, 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 around. So just, you know, just retopologize it like you would a normal eyelids, just so the shape has been moved down. I wouldn't do anything else. Yeah, my buddy Blizzard still prefers hard surface in Maya, but it's where most artists are doing their hard surface characters in Zbrush. Like, it depends what I'm doing as well. Like, if I were to design some kind of a Doom armor, that would be much easier to do in Zbrush, I think, because it's very organic. But if I'm doing like looking at what I have on my desk now, like I have like a bottle of water, and I have like a watch here. Some AirPods. Like I would never model that in Zbrush. Like it just doesn't make any sense. It's just much faster to do this in Maya directly. Like the topology is good from the get-go. You have much more control. But you know, if you're doing design work, that's a whole different thing. Because you know, then like who knows, who cares about topology there? Then it's all about what works. So all easy what visually works. But yeah, if I'm dealing with topology, I think it's much better to deal with this in Maya or Blender, you know, whatever, poly modeling. Kitten is asking, wouldn't that cause some issues with baking? What I was describing with the hooded eyelids. It might. You might have to split it into 2 meshes and bake them like that, or use like a nice cage around it. But yeah, maybe. But you know, they shouldn't be overlapping. When you're doing like that, there shouldn't be any overlapping whatsoever. Like meaning, or intersections rather. There shouldn't be any intersection, because you know that's not how it works in real life. But yeah, I have to sign off pretty soon, because we've been going for a long time now, and I would love to be able to continue this later this week. And then this Norwegian man needs to not be completely destroyed. So yeah, we can do like last questions now. We can do like two more questions, and then we can call it quits. Yeah, one of the last two is C-Modeler, very different to poly modeling in Maya or Blender. Yeah, C-Modeler is a weird one. It is a quite different modeling tool. It's very intuitive for certain things, and it's very counterintuitive for certain things. It's in no way a replacement for the poly modeling tools. It's an additional tool, which means that modeling in Maya or modeling in Zbrush is much better than it used to be. But it doesn't replace anything. Just makes it more comfortable to model in Zbrush. I'll just give it a second for the last question. We can make sure that's a good one. While waiting for that, let me just show you, guys, just a reminder now that we do have 50% off on nearly all products on the FlippedNormals marketplace. We have tons of really, really cool products, like the FlippedNormals lighting scenes, concepting with Marvelous Designer, skin texture and shading for production with another Norwegian, which is nice, with Mari and Maya, hard surface modeling, lighting scenes for Blender, introduction to XGen, using the iKit. This is actually super cool. You guys have to see this one. The iKit is super nice. This is a product we commissioned to make, which is just really, really high quality eyes. You can zoom like stupidly far in, and it still holds up like this. So this is something we use to create these kind of eyes, and it's just drag and drop into it. So I highly recommend the iKit. Main question of the stream: Minecraft or Terraria? That is Terraria. It's one of those games you just kind of play for like 10 minutes and then there's no longer any sun out. Are you teaching on Udemy? Nope, only teaching on FlippedNormals. Yeah. But cool. So yeah, that's the stream for today. Let's see if we how we continue this later this week. It will be tons of fun to continue watching this. Continue doing this stream throughout the week. Maybe sculpting another creature tomorrow, another dinosaur dragon kind of thing. So yeah, thank you so much to everyone who attended. I really appreciate it, and it's tons of fun seeing the support as well from you guys. It's really motivating. So thank you so much.